A random kid awoke a talent for cooking and used it to conquer the apocalypse. His skill with a knife wasn't just for show. His food granted superhuman strength. The entire army, once broken and ready to quit, ate his cooking and suddenly charged back into the fight, their spirits ablaze. It was all thanks to the main character's dishes. He handled everything himself, nearly earning his freedom from mandatory service. But fate intervened. He opened a door to a nightmare, a monster devouring his friend, one of them desperately through hot oil, a futile act that cost him his life. But our hero saw it a weak point and struck down the Chinese beast, awakening his power. A system alert popped up. Capture the flag in Sector R-17. He ignored the quest to search for survivors, only to find death. Later, as he scouted an Tensi ammo warehouse, a creature ambushed him, and that's when his ingredient analysis skill activated. The beast charged furiously, but this time, the boy knew he could actually fight back. The monster let out a scream unlike any it had made before. He had just unlocked the novice dagger skill. Shin emerged, covered in blood, realizing that without that system message, he would be dead. He felt something peculiar. His new boss's eyes skill meant no ingredient was too tough to handle. Shin paused. An ingredient was the system? Seriously classifying a monster as food, since then, a soldier appeared, and they headed for another base, a place where morale had hit rock bottom. He was quickly summoned to a meeting with a corrupt lieutenant. Half-thin remaining soldiers were grunts, and only the mentally stable were present. The transport unit was down to 10 members. The recon unit had 7, and the cooking unit had just Shin. Only about 100 people had made it. Minjae reported that all contact with the outside world was gone. Communications were dead. The lieutenant panicked, and as soldiers suggested it was North Korea, but their defenses should have held. The fear of death and concern for their families filled the air. They looked to their commanding officer for orders, the only one left, but he stood frozen, unable to lead. Panic erupted as soldiers began to argue amongst themselves. The lieutenant decided to send men for orders, but Shin warned them of the dangers ahead. A 2-hour journey through hostile territory? Ignoring Shin, the officer simply asked for volunteers. Shin saw it clearly the lieutenant was terrified of taking responsibility and trying to pass the buck. Disappointed, he kept silent. With no other option, the officer ordered everyone else to stay put at the base and demanded a report on their remaining supplies. Our hero thought to himself. He'd expected more from this fool. Young Jun reported 6 weeks of food, or maybe 2 months if they were careful. Plenty of ammo, but no chance of resupply. They discussed monster tactics, power, and water while they waited. The mood calmed slightly just before the lieutenant dismissed everyone, irritated. Shin finally questioned the silence on the awakenings. He realized he was the only awakened person there, and decided it was time for a demonstration. He grabbed his kitchen knife, and, channeling the feeling of dicing vegetables, sliced the wooden table clean in half. Everyone stared in shock. He explained that he'd awakened after killing that monster. The lieutenant was skeptical, but Shin admitted he had his doubts at first too. Then, he made a promise to protect and feed every single one of them, proposing that their new mission was to help everyone awaken. Before they could react, a soldier shouted a warning. 5 monsters were approaching. The lieutenant ordered everyone to their positions. Shin ran, his heart pounding. Outside, the soldiers learned it took nearly a full magazine to bring down just one of these creatures. Even with their ammo stores, they wouldn't survive a war of attrition. After the attack, the officer praised the troops and ordered a head count. They had lost 2 more soldiers. They buried them nearby. The battle was over, and the meeting's decisions were enacted. 2 volunteers left, with supplies to contact the upper unit, while the others fortified the base and rationed food. They wondered why they hadn't awakened. Shin guessed they just weren't close enough. When the monsters died, he shared his intel on the creature's weak spots, their armpits, and a vulnerability to heat. The lieutenant ordered all bayonets to be sharpened for close quarters combat. Jun, the unit's strategist, supported the new approach and began drafting plans. Before the next fight, Shin approached him for a meal, reminding them to keep their strength up. Back in the kitchen, he noticed how much his cooking skills had leveled up since his awakening. He whipped up some perfect pork belly, controlling the heat with an almost mystical precision. The dish gave the soldier a temporary buff to his strength and agility, also raising the whole team's morale. Shin saw the meal granted a mystery status buff, and the system gave him a new quest. Use the chef's special sauce. Energy flooded his hand, giving him the power to control emotions with food. With the soldiers panicking, he used this new skill to calm them down for dinner. After the meal, everyone reported, feeling totally re-energized, even asking for seconds. Shin knew this power could be a game changer for the group's morale. But of course, a new attack suddenly interrupted their feast, rushing to the barracks. They found two monsters still standing. Following Shin's plan, a soldier moved in to finish one off. With a final bayonet thrust, the monster fell and the soldier awakened as an electric mage. Surprised by the floating window, the young man showed off his new powers, proving the experiment was a huge success. The awakenings were real. Shin watched, thrilled he'd helped the unit's first awakening. The team celebrated as the second soldier approached. But this guy stopped to have a midlife crisis right in front of the monster, which almost sent him to the afterlife. However, after a desperate fight that left everyone sure he was a goner, he finally defeated it and awakened as an astronomer, of all things. Unsurprisingly, other captains refused to try awakening after that near-death incident. Some even tried to pressure their captain, saying a leader must be awakened, but he was still spooked. A little later, our hero spoke to an awakened soldier, who warned that they couldn't follow a cowardly, unawakened leader. But our guy told him to relax, that he'd handle it. Soon after, he headed straight for the kitchen and cooked up the ultimate courage stew to motivate the captain, using it as an excuse to talk. The captain now seemed like a totally different person, fired up and ready to go. Everyone said it was insane, but he told them not to worry. With that, he faced the half-dead monster, and without even using a bladed weapon, he punched, blocked, and even bit the creature, finally killing it and leaving everyone stunned. They cheered that it was the wildest fight they had ever witnessed. But the officer's face didn't look too friendly. Despite the cold look, he still thanked Sergeant Shin. This only made Hung more scared of the officer. And after seeing that, our hero decided he should probably be more careful with his magic cooking. Naturally, the protagonist was asked what on earth he did to the officer to make him change so much from before. In response, Shin just said he gave him food and talked, which blew Hung's mind with his supposed persuasive skills. Our hero just claimed that's how the human heart works. But Hung wondered if it would really be that easy to convince everyone. Shin just smiled, saying no one can resist the power of being heard. Obviously, the kid wasn't buying it, and Shin knew it was a pretty weak excuse. The real reason was his ability, a power he couldn't reveal just yet. After all, this was different from just being good with a knife. And since everyone saw Kwang go completely berserk, it was easy to say he had a temporary personality shift. This meant the hero's ability could be very dangerous if he wasn't careful. Changing gears, the protagonist thought a young man, that kind becoming a berserker, could be bad. Hung disagreed, saying survival was all that mattered now. With their lives on the line, Shin asked his friend to send all the awakened to the kitchen for a meal he'd prepare. But Hung worried if they could. Since the battalion's food supply was getting low, then our hero explained that most of it was preserved emergency food, which is why all the fresh stuff needed to be eaten before it spoiled. Besides, the sergeant himself was starting to dream about a decent meal. However, Shin was secretly worried if his skills would even work on emergency rations, which had no cooking process. Back at the barracks, a beast was running wild while being chased. The soldiers were trying to herd the monster into a corner, and despite a few hiccups. Overall, Shin thought the awakened were performing pretty well. Although at that moment, one of the beasts that would serve as a sacrifice was killed. Hung immediately started chewing out his unit, which soured the mood. The hero's optimism was misplaced. The real issue now was how to lure a monster for the finishing strike. These beasts had incredible resilience, and they'd rage harder the closer they got to death. Awakenings had to be handled with extreme care. There was no room to rush. Then, word came that the sergeant had captured one. Hung was thrilled finally, a textbook capture. As they reached the location, the soldier had indeed prepared the perfect offering. Hung declared they now just needed someone to deal the final blow. So, Mr. Hayak from the transport unit was called. Next on the list, he accepted his superior's command without a single complaint. Hyung asked if the kid was feeling confident, advising him to aim for the beast's armpit. Having trained for this exact moment, Hayuk delivered a single blow that killed the monster instantly. And just then, that familiar blue panel appeared for him, ecstatic. He announced he'd unlocked the sniper class. With this, the number of awakened among them was now 5. Shin asked if the class was what it sounded like, when suddenly more windows started appearing, making the soldier nervous. He quickly reported everything to the sergeant, including a strange new message about faction formation. A message that had also appeared for all the other awakened members. Since 5 was the magic number, our hero now led the first faction in the Rock 17 region. Not that Shin understood a single word of these system alerts. The moment Hayuk awakened, that same window appeared for all players, along with an achievement, It congratulated them for forming a faction so quickly. For securing third place, they got a reward of 10 sensi. Growth elixirs. This potion could boost a person's experience gain by 500%. Back in reality, the men asked what to do next. Shin ordered all the awakened to gather. Later, in an emergency meeting, Hung said this all felt more like a video game. Hayak agreed, noting the 5 awakened requirement. At this, our hero thought about that message. If it was accurate, they could level up at an insane speed using the elixirs. But Kwang was more worried they were the third group formed, not the second or first. Ultimately, this confirmed there were other survivors out there. Inevitably, the safety of their families came up again. But with the military itself in such a sorry state, it was hard to imagine things were any better outside. By this point, most of their families had likely been killed by the monsters. Our hero urged them not to think so. Pessimistically, he was worried too. But right now, the group's survival was the absolute priority. Hayuk tried to argue, but Shin shouted, reminding them they had a head start in this twisted game and they had to focus, though unhappy about it. Hyung agreed with our hero. After all, they could only find their families if they were still alive. In any case, Kwang reminded them that despite 100 surviving soldiers, the faction had only 5 members. This led to a grim realization. Only the awakened actually counted. Shin knew the kid wasn't wrong. In this new world, if you weren't awakened, you barely even counted as a person. Hung then recalled Hayuk's new sniper class, commenting it was likely granted from his natural talent. As for its traits, Hayuk said his accuracy and firepower were boosted when he fired. Hung was impressed, but also worried about the day their ammunition would run out. But the boy just smiled, telling the officer not to worry. If a normal soldier needed 10 shots to kill one beast, he only needed 2. At this, our hero was overjoyed. With this new ability, hunting monsters would become much easier. From now on, Hayak was their official monster finisher. Unfortunately, that was the only good news. Shin felt relieved that the unit could relax a bit, but there was no time to get discouraged, because to survive, they had to advance. Naturally, they needed to keep awakening the others. And thankfully, most were willing to try. Some, however, were still cowering in fear. But when that happened, our hero would intervene. And after a few minutes outside with him, the soldiers' personalities changed completely. With this, Hung's suspicion deepened since everyone shared the same reckless energy. Reaching his limit, the boy could no longer stay silent and confronted Shin, his stress mounting. Hyung roared that our hero was keeping secrets, because whenever soldiers talked to him, they returned different. And he wasn't wrong. Cornered, the protagonist confessed it all, explaining it was for the battalion's own good. Luckily, Hung understood, waking the troops while our hero handled the cooking. Suddenly, a system window flashed, showing a total of 82 accumulated points. Shin figured they came from hunting monsters or from his cooking. In games, points are for buying shop items, so he reasoned there had to be one here too. After a little searching, he found it and opened the system's point shop. His theory was confirmed. Naturally, he decided to start browsing. The displayed items included a combat axe, and even a knife and some rye bread. Most gear was for the combat class, making the only useful thing. For him, that single loaf of bread. He also spotted potions that boosted specific stats, but their prices were insane. He decided to save his points, knowing those potions seemed incredibly important. For now, he had his chef's special sauce and chef's eye skills, along with novice dagger proficiency. That last one let him master combat stances with a dagger. His training with Kwang was going surprisingly well. So far, he hadn't fought with his fists or a sword, but he was getting deadly with a kitchen knife. If this was just the novice level, Shin could only imagine a master-level skill. He'd also gained beginner flame affinity after foolishly grabbing a hot pan. Now, he could hold fire for 3 or 4 seconds, a skill with potential. And finally, there was beginner culinary proficiency. In a chat with Hung, he explained his meals gave an energy boost, which also raised his own stats, although no one else noticed, likely because normal soldiers lacked a status window. Besides, the food's buffs didn't trigger any system messages. The system kept it quiet. If it announced the meal's effects, his secret would be exposed instantly. Anyway, our hero asked how he felt. Hung confirmed he felt much stronger, with a 30% strength boost. So the buffs were definitely working. If Hung's testimony was true, Shin's abilities were not to be underestimated. Now, he just had to find a way to buff the whole battalion. Just then, a desperate soldier ran up demanding the sergeant. Gasping for air, he said a new type of monster had shown up over the armory. It was completely different from the armored lizards. Reaching the barracks roof, The soldier introduced himself. But Hung just cut straight to the point. Where is it? The soldier explained he was on watch when something he'd never seen before caught his eye. Its appearance was unlike anything they had encountered. To prove his point, he handed a pair of binoculars to the officer. The soldier was clearly terrified. After he pointed out the location, the two began scanning the area. Hyung asked if the main character saw anything. At first, he saw nothing until his eyes locked onto something monstrous. After a moment, Shin finally saw it, a unique beast among the regulars. The moment their gazes connected, Shin felt a chill. The beast was heading for the barracks. This thing was huge, nearly 3 meters tall, and had others with it. It had to be the leader. Our hero agreed this was strange. Lizards normally attacked in pairs at most. So it became obvious. This larger one was an outsider. With 20 smaller ones at its side, the potential threat was massive. At this site, Hung stated they'd need a ton of bullets, but that wasn't the real problem. The battalion was outnumbered, though they knew the monster's weaknesses. However, something about this situation felt incredibly off. Cutting to the chase, our hero asked when the beast had first appeared. The soldier explained it arrived that morning. So far, its behavior had been normal, simply remaining still at the perimeter. Hearing this, Hung suggested the monsters were scared. In Shin, he couldn't grasp why the massive horde wasn't attacking. Then, a realization dawned on our hero. They were waiting for the perfect opening. Shin knew the beasts were smart enough to ignore a simple net. That's why they were just surrounding the base. The other two awakened felt a chill crawl up their spines. Could these creatures truly be intelligent? He recalled that even normal wolves are cunning hunters. These bipedal monsters had to be smarter. Kwang agreed, then suggested a bold move. A preemptive strike. The idea shocked them all, but Shin shot it down immediately. Their only advantage was inside these walls. Leaving was suicide. Their priority was observing the enemy, to find a weakness and form a plan. With that, Hung said he'd report this to the company commander. Shin told him to warn the men to stay alert. News like this could easily breed crippling fear. Fear of the unknown had to be crushed. So, our hero went to the kitchen. His weapon's special sauce. While eating, 2 soldiers shared their relief. Here, inside the base, they actually had a chance. A real chance at survival. The main character then whipped up some gourmet kimchi octopus. A soldier remarked it was terrifying at first, but somehow he felt more at ease now. Beyond the octopus, there was savory pork with vegetables. The first soldier continued. He was worried sick about his family, but if he could survive, surely they could too. Because of this, soldier morale stayed high and the defense never faltered. Their awakened count reached 20, nearly half a battalion's worth. Later, the hero noted the stalemate hadn't changed. A soldier confirmed the beasts hadn't budged, but their numbers had suddenly doubled. Twice the horde they had first spotted. A flicker of worry crossed the soldier's face. What if the horde kept growing? But Shin reminded him their own power was growing too. Of those 20, 3 were elite snipers. They could land a perfect shot from afar, even with subpar rifles. If it came to a counterattack, Shin was confident they wouldn't lose. If they kept awakening more people, the battle would only get easier. Inside the storage room, our hero took stock of their supplies. They'd tap into rations next week. By then, half the base would be awakened. At this rate, the troops would be panicking without his meal buffs. Shin began listing out necessary items. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed. The hallway plunged into darkness. A total power failure. A chill ran down his spine. The mechanics swore the generators were fine. He quickly wondered if the entire base had gone dark. Then, a horrifying thought struck him. What if this was planned? A deliberate move by the monsters? If so, they were in serious trouble. He didn't hesitate for a second. He sprinted out. Knowing the base was compromised, Shin said their snipers could handle anything. But that plan changes when you have no visibility. Without power, the snipers were blind. They were now completely useless. Elsewhere, the lieutenant barked orders, sending men to their posts. Battle positions. Snipers to the roof, all other awakened were to assume their designated roles. A soldier reported the troops were secure in the ammo depot. The lieutenant ordered it sealed. Seal the entrance. With a heavy clang, the great gates were shut and barred. They were almost set. Final placements were underway. Luckily, they still had a stock of flares, Shin declared. The monsters aren't endless, but we must finish this fight fast. He then asked where the awakened were. Hung explained he'd formed them up around the snipers. Mages were split between offense and defense. Warriors took point to form a protective line, and everyone's morale was soaring high. All thanks to the sergeant's gourmet buff meals. Hung then asked where Shin would be stationed. Shin simply revealed his knife. Hung was stunned. The front lines. But Shin just reminded him. He was the very first awakened. Besides, who was going to stop him suddenly? A fierce wind began to howl. The ground itself started to tremble. Peering into the darkness, they saw it. The monsters were coming. Straight for the base. A flare ignited the sky, bathing them in light. The lieutenant looked and gasped. He stared through his binoculars. The terrifying horde was surging ever closer to their walls. With that, Hayek asked. The captain gives the signal, and the lieutenant screams for all troops to open fire. Dozens, no, hundreds, of shots ring out. Some beasts fall, but the horde pushes forward. Luckily, our hero's meal plan is working perfectly, but once the flares die, they're all in deep trouble. From within the swarm, the boss finally emerges. As the biggest threat, all sniper fire now converges on him. Quickly, aides, rush more ammo to the Awakened. Yuck just smirks, declaring he'll take the boss down. But at that moment, our hero's boss eye skill activates on its own. The system reveals this lizard leader is the rarest and absolute strongest of its kind. No other dares defy his will. This boss is also insanely fast, weaving through every bullet fired. At that moment, our hero understands they're not even the same species. But to Shin, it doesn't matter how strong he is. It's just dumb to be on the front line as the commander. That attitude just paints a giant target on his back for the Awakened. Then, with a deafening roar, the beast empowers the other monsters. The scream rips through the base, causing intense pain in the soldiers' ears. The system announces that the troops have been hit by a powerful war cry. As a result, the strength, speed, and health of all lizards have been temporarily buffed. Not only that, all the geckos gained bullet resistance. In contrast, every other creature nearby was inflicted with confusion and dizziness. Seeing this, a panicked Hung turns to the protagonist, asking what's happening. Looking at the struggling troops, Shin knows they are in a seriously dangerous situation. The soldiers quickly alert the lieutenant, who is stunned that a single skill can cause so many debuffs. But before he can even think, the normal monsters begin their advance, now far more aggressive. Hayuk, still on the roof, clutches his splitting headache, realizing the system's prediction was dead on. At this rate, all their defenses are about to collapse. Because of this, Huck screams, questioning what his allies are even doing. In a desperate yell, he orders them to group up and keep firing. Amidst the total chaos, our hero is on the front line, holding back the tide. In his head, he calculates that the shooting frequency has plummeted. This must be the effect of the boss's debuff. Bullets are useless now, so all ammo is being sent to the Awakened. Hung, meanwhile, wonders why the monster didn't use this power earlier. Shin recalls the system message the effect is temporary. The boss had been waiting for the perfect moment. This beast wasn't just strong, it could think and strategize. In any case, our hero tells his colleague to gather all the Awakened. For Shin, ranged attacks are now pointless. Everyone needs to prepare for close quarters combat. After explaining his strategy, each Awakened soldier receives a special treat. And since no one has a clue, our hero finally decides to reveal the whole truth. While some may have guessed it, Shin's ability can actually enhance others. He reminds them that they've all eaten something he cooked before awakening. That's why his food is now not just better, but grants special effects. To those who eat it, Shin, being prepared, explains that each treat contains a specific buff. Hearing this, Hung says there's no need to fear. If they stick to their training, the unit has a real chance. This is how they'll secure the base and ensure the group's survival. And so, the entire battalion gets a power-up. Kwang is tasked with the boss monster, and after eating his top-tier treat, he doesn't question it for a second. Back on the roof, Huck is still yelling about what everyone is doing, unable to hold back the swarm alone. But down below, the Awakened were preparing for this very advance. With a flash, the attack buff is applied, just as all the beasts leap over the barricades. The lieutenant starts to panic, but the Awakened are now ready for war. With just a single punch, Kwang sends a monster flying. He gets attacked by another, but doesn't even flinch. As everyone joins the fight, an all-out brawl begins. As the battle rages, Hong shouts commands, telling the soldiers not to break formation. However, one of the Awakened is pushed into a corner. Just as he's about to be finished off, our protagonist appears, wielding his trusty kitchen knife. With one clean slice, he eliminates the monster. Naturally, for our hero, this is just another day in the kitchen. And the beasts, too. The boss's aura supercharged the lizards, making them incredibly tough. That's why Shin knew he couldn't handle this alone, not against a high-level boss. But after eating his own courage chocolate cookie, his stats exploded. Every single attribute received a massive boost for an entire day. The chef's special sauce granted everyone courage. Suddenly, the regular lizards were no longer a threat. The courageous soldiers were now masters of this battlefield. What's more, all hostile. Targets suffered reduced stats and morale. As the boss charged, a system alert popped up, warning that this would unlock new traits in his allies. Kwang felt it first. His confusion instantly cleared by the courage. Buff, feeling revitalized, he roared for his comrades to charge an honorable battle, awaited them. Monsters swarmed the entrance as the troops moved to intercept. Kwang took the lead, clearing a path. He ignored the danger, sprinting straight for the boss monster. And in that instant, they collided with thunderous force. From afar, Hung laughed in disbelief, commenting that this feeling was incredible, wondering what Shin had done to boost their stats so high. But our hero was too busy. To chat, he was busy slaughtering monsters. Hyung noted that with these buffs, they'd already surpassed the enemy. Victory was just a matter of time. But Shin warned everyone not to let their guard down. They had to hold the line while Kwang handled the leader. With that, our hero ordered Hung to provide ranged support as they both charged forward. Another Awakened raised a powerful shield to defend, while snipers laid down covering fire. Meanwhile, Hung unleashed his Thunder Spear skill, as our hero brandished his trusty kitchen cleaver. But his thoughts turned to Kwang, who was still fighting the boss one-on-one. His blows were landing, but the monster's defenses were on another level. And because of that incredible toughness, the beast whipped its tail around the officer's neck and flung him aside just as it moved in, for the kill. An awakened warrior leaped in to help. He was quickly joined by another comrade. And so, with a daring coordinated attack, they brought the beast down. Now, it was Kwang's time to shine. Without wasting a second, he dashed forward, leaping onto the boss and delivering a devastating punch. The monster roared in agony. The officer unleashed a relentless barrage, even stooping to bite off a chunk of the beast. And then, with savage brutality, Kwang finally finished off the monster's boss. The remaining creatures were mostly defeated. Our hero immediately ordered everyone to stay alert, telling senior officers to confirm the status of all unit members. A wave of relief washed over the soldiers, who began to smile and celebrate. But Shin still looked on in disbelief. Even with their firearms rendered useless, they had actually won. Suddenly, a system window appeared. It congratulated Shin for seizing control of Area Rock 27 and announced that the group had evolved, receiving the provisional designation Battalion 423. The global event's battle status also appeared, but its values were hidden. No one had a clue what it meant, so the system clarified that their group was the very first to occupy a large-scale area. Faced with this incredible news, our hero could only laugh and celebrate their #1 spot. But after the high of victory came the sobering aftermath. A new battle began. The infirmary was overwhelmed, with a long line of injured. Amid the chaos, the most critical cases were rushed away on stretchers, with Mr. Park organizing the transport. In the battle's wake, the healers were the busiest of all. Fortunately, both awakened healers and regular doctors were able to manage the situation. Once the awakened used their powers, the soldier's pain vanished instantly. Seeing this, Hung expressed his relief, believing things were finally calming down. In response, our hero thanked his friend for his hard work, but the officer insisted the real credit belonged to Kwang and Soo-hyuk. Both of them were now completely exhausted, passed out on stretchers. By the way, the protagonist asked about their commander, but Hung had no idea where he was either. For Shin, this wasn't a surprise, just another disappointment. Later on, our hero asked about the extent of their new territory. Hung explained it reached the mountain range. The reason, he knew this was because the system confirmed they controlled the entire ridge. Currently, the soldiers were positioned at the range's highest peak. Besides them, only lizards remained in the area. However, the officer wondered if this was about who held the prime spot. And if Hung's hunch was right, the soldiers fought off mountain lizards, only to be branded as occupiers. For Shin, this actually sounded like good news. But Hung reminded him that with the casualties from yesterday, the lizard group had taken a massive hit. So the officer suggested that right now, they should launch a counterattack and wipe them out. However, Shin made it clear that it wouldn't be so easy. Hung, of course, questioned this. But our hero reminded him that yesterday's battle was brutal, even with their terrain advantage. For him, there's a huge difference between defending a position and having to break one. But again, the officer questioned this decision, since they now had incredible powers and more awakened troops. However, the protagonist told the kid not to count on that meal buff again. It needed quality ingredients, customized flavors, and 4 to 7 hours of prep time. At this, the officer was shocked they weren't just normal dishes. Besides, our hero had been prepping for that invasion for ages, replicating something like that now would be impossible. Hung paused, saying they would have to plan this out later. Changing topics, the officer yelled to the soldiers that once they were done, they should unload the next truck. The battle left tons of monster corpses, far too many to burn or bury. By the way, our hero asked if Hung had checked the system's advantages. Turns out, Shin had already analyzed all the options but was still stumped on what to pick. At this, Hung just grinned and said, the protagonist should just pick any of them. While it seemed important, nobody had any intel on the benefits yet. Besides, Hung said he and the others would feel better if the hero chose first. Shin knew they couldn't ask the commander now, since he wasn't around. In that case, the hero simply went for the Bimana mobile fortress. Hearing this, Hung questioned the decision, and Shin explained the name was a dead giveaway. The protagonist figured this benefit would likely grant something, like a tank, and while they didn't need one now, they would soon, because the group would eventually run out of food. Shin admitted he wasn't sure what it was, but it should help. Then, Hung was convinced by this logic and decided to make the same choice. With that, the protagonist selected the Mana Mobile Fortress and chose the power to summon. With a golden aura flaring around him, the hero summoned the fortress. But after a pause, the system warned there wasn't enough space for the summoning there. At this, Hung's jaw dropped, and Shin guessed it must be due to all the corpses on the ground. So the two decided to find a more open place to test the new power. Before leaving, Hung ordered the soldiers to finish the rest of the work. Then, as they headed out, all Shin could wonder was just how big this thing could be. But night fell, and no place they found had enough space to summon it. Naturally, our hero was frustrated he couldn't test his power, but at least he gained some experience. The hero gets 1 experience point every time someone eats a dish with an enhancement. In this case, the kid figured everything seemed to be going well. Shin was getting stronger, and more troops were awakening. At that moment, however, a knock came at the boy's door, and upon entering, the hero saw it was Lieutenant Kim. At the sight, Shin immediately shot to his feet to greet the lieutenant with proper military respect. After informing him he was resting, Kim just looked at our hero, smiling, wasting no time. The lieutenant approached and praised the protagonist for his fine work. Kim kept laying on the flattery, but Shin didn't want compliments, especially from someone who was useless and always vanished when things got tough. Back to the fake praise. The lieutenant thanked God everyone was fine, but warned there was still no good news. At this, our hero asked what happened to the 2 soldiers sent to the upper units. But Kim just sat down casually and said they probably weren't coming back. Shin, for his part, gritted his teeth in fury. It could have been him, chosen for that mission. Anyway, Kim commented he heard they were closing the cafeteria to eat combat rations. Our hero confirmed the rumor. So, the lieutenant asked if they couldn't just eat real food. Shin apologized, explaining they were in a crisis and had to conserve everything. But Kim shot back that he was the only boss left. And when it came to the awakening, Shin hadn't spared any food. Of course, that was a special case, not by choice. It was a vital boost to survive the dangerous awakening process. So, Kim cynically asked what the already awakened ate last time. Shin tried to explain the food's effects. Naturally, the lieutenant scoffed, and our hero was powerless to argue back. After all, Kim was the highest-ranking officer left. And if the outside world still existed, Kim would unfortunately become a very important figure in the future. Shin could only grit his teeth and obey, but his reluctance infuriated the lieutenant. He snapped, yelling he'd eat the damned rations. Grudgingly, Kim decided to let it go. He knew their situation was dire. With that, he stormed out and slammed the door. The loud bang echoed through the hall. Shin had never smoked, but this stress was intense. He seriously considered lighting one up. With the mountain secured, monster attacks were cut by half. Later, in the infirmary, Shin updated Huck on everything that had happened. Huck was injured during his awakening. He thanked Shin for his hard work, but Shin insisted it was a team effort. He then asked about Huck's leg treatment. The boy explained it was too late. Though healthy, his leg was permanently damaged. Walking would always be a struggle. Guilt gnawed at our hero over the boy's fate. If only he hadn't pushed for the awakening, maybe things would be different. However, Huck sensed his guilt and cut him off. He held no grudge. If they hadn't even tried, monsters would have devoured them all. His injury was just the price of survival. To the other soldiers, Shin was the reason they were still alive. So, he asked him not to shoulder all the blame alone. His words moved the cook, and the boy led Shin outside. Once outside, Huck revealed his class astronomer. Shin, of course, was completely clueless about what that meant. Huck explained it was like reading the constellations in the stars to foresee certain events. He could even tell the future, sort of like horoscopes. Finally, it clicked. This kid was a walking, talking human radar. The class itself wasn't for combat, but he could sense danger before it struck. And that was incredibly useful for strategy. That's why Huck sought him out. The boy had already discovered two things. The first was that they would have visitors tomorrow. Shin instantly knew what that implied. Huck warned him, "You should hide your claws." The next day, a group appeared, shocked, to find an active military base there. They cried out, hoping soldiers were inside. Because of this, a mother cried out with renewed hope, wasting no time. They all rushed toward the base, which, for some reason, stood wide open. Hours before, the soldiers were on watch, expecting visitors within the hour. It was the 11th day since the attack. Our hero and his officers spotted someone climbing the mountain. Hyung noted that civilians were ignoring the warning signs. That forbid entry. Still, they had nowhere to go, so he asked what they should do. Shin's answer was simple: they'd shelter them. The officer clearly disagreed with the choice, but kept his doubts to himself. As they waited, Shin wondered if these were the people Taijun had mentioned. An hour later, in the courtyard, a soldier ordered the civilians to calm down and form a single file line. Another soldier arrived with a clipboard for registration and identification. At last, water was handed out. Hyung returned with a head count: 25 survivors of all ages. Hyung proposed the military take the second floor, leaving the third for the newcomers. He also suggested more night patrols, and Shin smiled. "We'll start by cleaning the second floor." In the background, the lieutenant greeted the first guard. Shin eyes the refugees. Was this man not the commander? Hung confirms he was just here to play the executive's little game. Kim then introduced himself as the unit's commander, calming the crowd with honeyed words. At that, the civilians buzzed. They thought this place only had regular soldiers. Now they demanded answers. What was the troop situation? And was there anything to eat? The lieutenant shouted that food would come right after all the paperwork was sorted. He ordered a nearby soldier to handle it quickly. Seeing this, Hung pulled our hero aside. They needed a private conversation. After introductions, Kim explained that these two were his top men, basically his second in command. Kim cut to the chase, asking if there was room for everyone. Our hero confirmed there was space. Hearing this, the lieutenant put Hyung in charge of guiding them. He also said he'd talk to Shin later, asking to report any issues immediately. With everyone starving, our protagonist asked to add 25 extra portions. It was utter madness, but neither man could refuse. Still, increasing meals by a quarter was a dangerous gamble. This couldn't end well, but for now, the civilians felt safe, all due to the lieutenant's management. Hyung was furious seeing the officers smile, but Shin calmed him. All they could do was obey. When the sergeants led, no one listened. But now that Lieutenant Kim was at the base, everyone was following him. It showed the refugees cared deeply about rank. With slick words and fake smiles, the civilians were eating it all up. And while the lieutenant was no great officer, Hung had to admit he was a smooth talker. Getting to the point, Shin decided to head to the cafeteria. Hung sent a few soldiers along to help. Later, the refugees ascended the building's staircase. They were headed to their new resting place, but an old man complained about the third floor and the stairs. Kwang quickly appeared, explaining that the first floor is a death trap and an invasion. That's why civilians were housed higher up. Still, the old man grumbled that he wasn't comfortable, but others were just happy to take a shower. Before they could celebrate, an announcement was made. There was no hot water. A girl complained, but everyone knew this was not a 5-star hotel. Later, it was time to eat. Tasting Shin's dish in the cafeteria, a wave of compliments arose. One man swore he never knew steamed rice could be this delicious. Our hero was a bit stunned by it all. It all happened so suddenly, but he was glad they were enjoying the meal. However, a deeper worry lingered. He was concerned about ingredients. Soon, they would be down to emergency rations. At this rate, their supplies would be gone in just over a month, breaking his grim thoughts. Someone else appeared. It was another compliment on the meal. Shin thanked her, but the blonde noted his talent and asked what he did for a living. A truly bizarre question to ask a soldier. He almost said he was a chef, but held back, stating he was a university student. The group thanked him and left, but Shin felt uneasy. He thought about that strange question. These days, jobs were no longer what they used to be. They were something exclusive, appearing in the status window only the awakened could see. Surely if other awakened heard that question, they'd have said warrior or healer. So our hero wondered if that was what Taijun had actually meant. As he walked the halls, Hung looked incredibly unhappy. Now, besides worrying about monsters, they also had to babysit all these survivors. Outside, a soldier sighed, asking how they got into this mess. Another complained he couldn't rest. The first one said he couldn't take it anymore. Another claimed the lieutenant just worsened things. That soldier said he preferred the sergeants in charge, as they had already proven themselves far better. The others agreed. A real sense of camaraderie had grown among them. And in the background, Hyung overheard the entire conversation. Later, those soldiers took their opinions directly to the sergeant. They went to the sergeant, recounting Kim's every cowardly act. However, one of them recalled a detail. The lieutenant had a high security level. They couldn't do anything. Still, the first soldier warned them. They were fighting a war against monsters. A commander like that would only get them all killed. The sergeant's words resonated deeply. In his gut, Shin knew it was true. Hung had always felt wary of the lieutenant. He knew the man wouldn't fight alongside them. And obviously, no one follows a leader who vanishes in battle. If this continued, the troops' morale and unity would certainly crumble. That's why the sergeant believed they had to act, and do it fast. Later, they all gathered on the building's roof, confused by the secret meeting. The sergeant spoke, apologizing for the late hour, but declared he could not wait, seeing the unease on everyone's faces. Getting straight to the point, Hung revealed he confronted Lieutenant Kim, a fact that grabbed everyone's attention. He had simply relayed their feelings, asking Kim to join the battle. But as expected, it was pointless. To the request, Kim replied he wouldn't be ordered around by a mere soldier. A heavy silence fell over the group. After a moment, the men grew furious, realizing the lieutenant didn't care at all. Even Hung was shocked by Kim's tyrannical behavior. Hung refocused them, warning this wasn't a light matter, as their very survival was at stake. That was why he called this meeting. The goal was to remove Kim from power. At first, they thought this was insane extremism. Our hero even questioned his colleague. They couldn't just dispose of an officer. Hung asked if Shin wasn't on their side, and how long he would simply follow along. In any case, Shin was deeply troubled. Kim was still a high-ranking officer, but Hung warned that as more survivors joined, their group would only get bigger. The sergeant questioned what would happen if Kim remained their representative. He argued that newcomers would eventually think the lieutenant was their true leader. At that point, the sergeants would lose all their autonomy. The sergeant then shouted, asking if he was wrong. Since Kim had no real power, there was no reason to obey him. After some thought, the soldiers began to see they had followed an incompetent for far too long. Still, they understood their duty as soldiers. Before the crisis, he had done his part. Kwang, however, found the idea dangerous, calling internal betrayal a modern type of warfare. Hung agreed, adding that was why they had to execute the plan swiftly. Without Kim, the highest ranks would be Park Tun and Shin Yong-jun. Even the regular soldiers could act on command. Without an officer, for Hung, this would be no issue, as Shin would lead the battalion. The sergeant's true motive was to prevent the lieutenant from being captured. However, most of the men still couldn't accept a cook as their commander. So, Shin reminded them he was the one, feeding them and providing their enhancements. His second point was crucial. Shin taking command was already happening. Hung dared anyone with objections to speak up. Shin understood their hesitation. But just then, the soldiers remembered how the hero had always looked out for them and comforted them with plenty of food. Reflecting on this, the soldiers knew they could count on him. Shin's buffs were the reason they won the invasion. The sergeant asked if anyone still objected. The hero still looked worried, with no dissent. Hung appointed the protagonist as their new commander. Though Shin disagreed, his friend just asked him to accept. With his appointment, a system window appeared, stating all conditions were now met. With over 30 players and a clear leader, a clan had been formed. As the first from the small region and the second in the large one, the group received a special reward. Our hero became leader of Clan 423, and the new job Rookie Chief appeared in his status. This was his reality now. Sergeant Shin had to lead the entire unit. He thought that if he was going to do this, he had to do it properly. So his first suggestion as commander was not to remove Lieutenant Kim, which left Hung and Kwang completely bewildered. In response, everyone begged the hero to reconsider, but he asked the soldiers to. But Shin insists they listen. He warns that if they abandon others for gain, they'll be living corpses, their spirits already dead. To protect their humanity, no one dies unless they are the aggressor. And this rule is a promise our hero demands from them all. This display of leadership makes Hung incredibly proud of the battalion's new direction. But the soldiers are skeptical. Why keep the useless lieutenant alive?
Shin coolly explains that while the man is just a troublemaker now, at this crucial moment.
Throwing him away is a waste, claiming he will prove useful. This just leaves everyone more baffled. About their new commander's cryptic plans, later, from the base's third floor, a lookout reports that the military unit has returned. A blonde man smirks, noting their little midnight field trip. His subordinate asks if it's a problem, but the blonde seems unconcerned. For now, nothing is wrong. They're just a bunch of kids in their 20s. However, he admits their captain seems strong, despite not being one of the military leaders. Changing gears, the blonde asks if his colleague completed his request, and the man confirms it. He found no awakened ones. A second scout took a look and saw that the soldiers are killing monsters with normal weapons. The blonde concludes there's a good chance they have no awakened. It's finally time to act. The gang leader's subordinates ask if they should move now, but ever cautious, the man decides to wait a few more days. The next day, the cafeteria buzzes with people excited for a good meal. Shin analyzes his clan leader token, which can grant a
Stat bonus, depending on the group's size. The system notes he must choose a symbolic object
to transform into the token. A group-wide stat buff is an incredible advantage. Therefore,
Shin laments that he has no worthy item to represent them. Just the day before, he had questioned
his new position, but Hung reminded him of the soldiers' trust. By then, the news that
Shin could kill a monster with only a knife had spread, and the soldiers didn't turn on our hero.
Because they knew he was dependable. Everyone understood they needed a leader they could trust. As an option, they had Kwang. But his personality was too unstable, swinging between aggressive and gentle, and in the end, the only strong, reliable person left to lead was him. In the kitchen, a soldier salutes the hero, and Shin asks if his request was carried out. The soldier confirms it. Whenever someone asks about their occupation, they are to act casual and not mention statuses. Shin also ordered them to avoid the topic of awakening entirely. This is all part of keeping their secrets safe and using Taejun's hint in the smartest way. Still, Shin believes this won't stop them from increasing the number of awakened, especially with their snipers. But the soldier warns that another problem has appeared. He says the survivors keep asking to speak with them, and one woman,
in particular, is repeatedly asking for a favor. Shin asks if it's important, but the soldier
only knows that she seems to be a leader for the other survivors. Cutting to the chase, the hero decides he should be the one to handle the conversation. He is mostly concerned about the lieutenant's reaction, but he makes it clear he will take care of Kim. Shin tells the soldier not to worry, because he already has a plan, but he decides to handle the favor first, and for that, he has requested 3 representatives from the survivor group. Our hero makes it clear the meeting will take place after dinner, and absolutely nothing can be leaked. Later, Shin prepares a fine plate of pasta. It's time to get things in order. Outside, a few soldiers watch their commander enter a basement. As one gets confused, his friend explains there's a room under the dining hall. It was built to provide hot water and electricity, holding a boiler and a generator. The first soldier is sure the place is now being used for something more than just storage. Down in the basement, Shin thinks Minji's idea to use this spot
as a prison was brilliant. It's a perfect cell. Wasting no time, he moves to deliver the meal to
the only prisoner there. But when the man realizes Shin is there, he's both confused and utterly shocked. That's because the prisoner is Lieutenant Kim, and his new jailer is his former cook. The previous day
was when the soldiers finally put their plan into action. With a sudden burst into the commander's room, the
sergeant unleashed a flash of electricity. The lieutenant never even stood a chance. He was out cold before he hit the floor. Back in the present, Kim is full of regret, vowing to apologize. Offended, our hero, completely baffled, gets an explanation he turned coffee into a radar and framed the guard. Kim knows he messed up the inspection, but that won't stop him from starting a rumor about prizes. Is not why he's actually imprisoned. Shin knows the lieutenant must be frustrated, locked away with no answers. That's when Kim starts venting about his other mistakes. He finally admits his fault and begs Shin for help, but our hero warns him.
He already tried to convince the others, but they're all holding a grudge. And just like that, Kim understands.
He begins to accept his grim fate. In this hopeless state, his mind floods with memories of all the officers who died under his command, but the hero tells him not to give up. He promises to keep trying, and more importantly, to bring him good meals. Touched by this kindness, Kim feels guilty for accepting so much, but Shin even brought his favorite dish. All Kim can do is thank him. After just one bite, pure joy explodes on his tongue, tears streaming down his face. He feels alive for the first time in ages. The protagonist smirks. This was a good idea after all. He hopes the lieutenant can savor this happiness. Days earlier,
Hung questioned why he was cooking lizard meat. Shin simply said they had a food shortage.
The sergeant asked if it was even edible, but Shin didn't know yet. Still, with no other options, he started experimenting with ingredients. He soon discovered that adding a little magic greatly improved the flavor and effect of his dishes, and with that, the masterpiece was done. He even earned the pioneer title for creating a new path in cooking. This title granted a 100% boost to ability effectiveness. Shin knew the perfect test subject. Back in the kitchen, he finished the dish rosy lizard dough, literally filled with happiness. Since it was a brand new recipe, his experience points shut up. Back in the present, the lieutenant says it's been forever since he's eaten well. He feels fantastic. With that, he begins to bask in a state of pure bliss. Shin, meanwhile, repeated this entire process. He was happy to feed the lieutenant, but even happier that Kim's mind and body were getting completely addicted to his food. Then, Shin cut off the Happy Meals, replacing them with bland rations. This drove the lieutenant mad, as a deep dependency had already formed. Just as planned. Now, the hero thought, it's time to get to work. Nearby, Young couldn't understand why Shin was feeding the lieutenant 3 times a day. The sergeant just figured,
Kim must be a huge fan of lizard meat. Then Kwang mentioned Shin requested another awakened lizard.
And slowly, they started to understand his plan. Back in the cell, the lieutenant was desperately demanding the cook bring him a proper meal. But Shin calmly told him that attitude was wrong. If he wanted better food, he'd need better manners. Of course, this was all part of the hero's calculation. He knew the deep emptiness the soldier was feeling. The lieutenant tried pulling rank, ordering
Shin to cook for him as an officer. But our hero made it clear that if his attitude didn't change,
he would leave and only return the next day. Defeated, Kim changed his plan and began to beg. He would do anything Shin wanted. Shin agreed to cook, but only on one special condition. They immediately went to the hall where the newly awakened are created. To Shin, the lieutenant, was a winning lottery ticket. Terrified, Kim learned the price for his next meal was to kill the monster. He did what was necessary to eat and awakened as a level 1 rookie. Commander? He was still shaking, but his new ability buffs all nearby troops by 10%. That was a much better result than the hero imagined. Kim demanded to know what was going on, but as he spoke, Shin could only think one thing, Jackpot. There are 2 ways to improve your
stats, either fixed numbers or percentage increases. A fixed stat boost works best on low-level targets.
Stats? Percentage buffs are more potent with higher base stats, so the lieutenant's talents will grow stronger as the troops level up, which is perfect. Just then, the system congratulates
Shin for his achievement. Irresistible flavor, rewarding him with a dragon heart. And with that, Shin hits level 10, promoting from rookie to junior. Chief level 1, our hero realizes that the max level was just a title. His stats now jump by 2 per level, not 1. On top of that, all his rookie talents evolved into junior level abilities. He was already a master with the old ones, so Shin can't help but wonder what comes next. The new batch of battle rations is already complete. Looking it all over, he grins. This ability is amazing. It can create preserved food for any emergency. While less potent than a hot meal, it has a long shelf life and is calorie dense,
making it simple to supply the troops. For this reason, Shin is amazed all over again, thinking about how incredibly useful this power is. But with that handled, it's time to face the survivors. Later, with everyone assembled, the person in charge begins, but one of the soldiers points out the lieutenant isn't there. In response, Shin explains he's indisposed because of his cooking, which leaves the others totally confused. Regardless, our hero tells them not to worry and to rely on Hungjai, the sharpest mind in the unit. But the sergeant sees that Shin is simply trying to push the responsibility onto him. Shin denies it, saying that despite being the leader, he won't be, controlling absolutely everything. With that, the sergeant heads to the meeting, and our hero
wishes them good luck. In the combined dorms, the sergeant enters with his men and notes that
everyone arrived quite early. As Hung and Shin take their seats, a tense atmosphere fills the room. Shin feels it. There's definitely someone here who wishes them harm. Following Tai Jun's orders, they have to hide their powers. So, their strategy for this talk is to gather as much intel as possible while giving away nothing. Wasting no time, the sergeant in charge introduces himself as the meeting's leader. And right on cue, the girl who called the meeting asks where the lieutenant is. Hung calmly informs her that he felt it was better if the ones responsible for the operation, came instead. The girl agrees with a strange look, and our hero notices something is off. The blonde guy then states he can't communicate with normal soldiers. But Hung warns that the 2 of them are the highest-ranking members here. At this, the survivor asks why it took 3 days to
set up this meeting. Hung explains it was for rest, and also to find an ideal representative. Besides, everyone is already swamped with military work. Hearing this, the blonde
questions if they're a lower priority than that work. The sergeant tells him not to think that way. The boy keeps arguing, and Shin gets irritated. It's always people like this who think they can do whatever they want. The blonde claims Hung is a soldier and must put people first. But before he can continue, the girl shouts, "Parkwan Chengging, stop startling everyone." She states that they meet. Military also took time from their schedule for them, so Park should be quiet. This simple act reveals the group's true leader to our hero. Back to the topic. The girl apologizes for her colleague, and Hung takes some blame, admitting he took too long to arrange the meeting. In any case, the girl introduces herself as Lee Sang-ah, a former clothing store owner, and the sergeant says he's glad she made it safely to their unit. Getting straight to the point, Hung asks if she can tell them how she ended up here, and Park agrees, understanding that everyone needs to know this. Shin, for his part, is quite pleased with his battle brother's performance. Wasting no more time, the girl begins explaining that about 2 weeks ago, monsters appeared from nowhere. At that same moment, communication, like the internet, TV, and phones, went dead. Then, survivors were attacked by all kinds of monsters, and those who were injured but survived turned into zombies. This revelation leaves the two soldiers completely shocked
by the information. The sergeant assumes they must be talking about the lizards, as they haven't
seen any zombies yet. Our hero finds this just as unexpected. Sensing their shock, the girl asks if there's a problem. He waves it off, claiming they just don't use the Z word. This little excuse stirs up some confusion in the group, since the monsters are obviously undead. So the girl asks what the military calls them. Hong, thinking fast, blurts out that they're called walkers. Shin, for his part, is completely lost. But the other guys recognize the term from TV shows and get the reference. They even joke about using the name, but Hung backtracks, admitting zombie is better. Lee simply accepts it. Shin thinks the guy is a bit awkward, but his strange plan actually worked. Miss Lee's story started. After she ran for her life from the dead, she found a group of survivors she stumbled upon. And while they were searching for a safe zone, someone told them all about a military base. That someone was the
older gentleman with them. Hearing this, Kwang asks how the man knew the location of the
unit. He claims a friend of his in construction told him. This friend had worked at a
military base near town, and only knew it was hidden deep in the mountains. The group had no idea
where exactly, but with nowhere else to go, they took the gamble. Because of this, Hung comments that it must have been a hellish journey, filled with danger. And then decides to ask a question, since he noticed the group had no weapons except a metal pipe. He wondered how these survivors managed to escape all the monsters. The girl answers directly, revealing they'd awakened powers, which was
something our hero already suspected. Survival was impossible without it. Out of 25 people, the girl
says she's the only awakened one who got everyone there. This is definitely useful information for our protagonist, but he finds it odd that only one of them awakened. Sensing their doubt, the girl stands up to show them her power. With a smirk, she pulls out 2 pairs of scissors from her coat. Lee explains they're just normal sewing scissors for fixing curtains. Shin then remembered hearing that the girl worked at a tailor shop, which explained her skills. Without wasting a second, the girl presses the scissors against the table and slices it in half, leaving the sergeant stunned, and our hero with a strange feeling. After her display, Lee explains she was at work when the monsters attacked. It was a desperate moment, but she grabbed a pair of her scissors, and right as she was about to be killed, she plunged the scissors tip right into a zombie. With that, a blue window appeared, granting the girl her superpowers. And now Lee claims she can take off a zombie's head with a single snip. Hearing this, our hero thinks the conditions for awakening from zombies must be different. Feeling uneasy, he asks why she's the only one awakened, which is also her question. Shin thinks that just killing a zombie isn't enough to awaken. Still, this whole situation seems extremely suspicious. Days ago, Taijun warned that someone would plot against them. So, our hero can't believe that Lee is the only awakened in her group. Changing topics, Hung asks if she has any theories on awakening, but she has no idea, believing it must be completely random. In any case, the sergeant thanks her, offering to help her anytime. Our hero reads into that differently, but decides to let it go. In the end, Shin figures they aren't planning anything bad, since that would also put them in danger. Hyung then says he'd also like to explain the unit's situation, and the girl agrees. He asks Kwang to clean the table for some leftovers, But our hero uses this time to start planning a little trap. Outside, our hero can't stop thinking. Zombies and other monster types. This information means their unit would have been caught off guard without these visitors. At that moment, 2 people come running, informing them that the dishes are clean. Our hero thanks them, and a girl says it was nothing special, as food isn't free. Seizing the moment, Shin mentions he just made some snacks and invites the pair to eat. They're obviously excited, to avoid trouble. He says that this is a gift for their hard work. The black-haired girl seems the happiest, so Shin tells her he made it with some leftover ingredients, so it should taste fine. The 2 see no reason not to try the ice cream, but this was a special ice cream, made with the chef's very own sauce of happiness. Our hero's plan is he suggests that helping with barracks tasks could lead to rewards. With that, the 2 finally dig in.
Their first spoonful is enough to cause a huge scene. One of them even admits she never expected it.
The ice cream was just that good, but her friend finds her sudden smile incredibly strange.
She hadn't smiled once since her parents died, but explains she just suddenly felt the urge.
At the sight of her friend's smile, the black-haired girl just breaks down in tears. The smiling girl tries to comfort her. She tells her this is a happy moment, not one for crying. Shin, however, knows the truth. After losing her parents, she's repressed so much. Right now, she's only acting happy.
This emotional boost is purely temporary, but the mental effects will linger long after.
Just like it did for Kwang. Regardless, the ice cream is a success, and our hero plans to use it again. That night, Hyung reports that he has the room number of the guy who was asking too many questions. Apparently, 5 people in that room knew each other before the outbreak. A suspicious little crew. But our hero points out that being friends doesn't automatically make them accomplices. Hyung agrees, but he still thinks they're probably working together. So, he asks what their next move is.
They can't just take out the boys and act like nothing happened. And Hyung knows they can't handle them, especially if they stage protests. But waiting is also a bad idea. If more awaken, they'll become a real problem. Shin declares his plan. He'll make them eat his food and confess everything they're doing.
Changing topics, he remembers the survivors agreed to clean. This gives our hero a brilliant idea. He'll pick one of them to stay in the cafeteria with him. Hyung immediately questions if this is another scheme. Like with Kwang and the lieutenant, Shin confirms it. And seeing his colleague's confidence, the sergeant is on board. But he has to ask if it'll be that simple, wondering if the hero has some other tricks up his sleeve. This question clearly makes our protagonist nervous, having been caught completely off guard. But Hyung backs off, figuring the truth about his skills will be revealed eventually. He just tells the hero to be careful. Shin gets it. No one would dare eat his cooking.
Not if they knew his secret ability. Still, he'll have to use it sometimes, very, very carefully.
So no one ever detects it. With that, the 2 decide to set a date and put their plan into motion. Everything happened way faster than they thought. Soon, the new assistant finishes his work quickly. Earning him some praise, as a reward, the hero brings out the special meal, just for him. The moment he sees it, the guy recognizes the famous chef's legendary ice cream. He explains that everyone who's tried it can't stop bragging. The protagonist just apologizes for the limited supply. But the boy understands it's a gradual process. He takes his first bite, and his eyes widen. He praises the incredible flavor. Now getting why everyone was so hyped, the hero is pleased, but not surprised.
Of course it was delicious. He poured his heart and soul into making it. The man is eating a special version.
One made with only the best ingredients. After finishing, the boy thanks him profusely. It had been ages since he'd tasted something so amazing. With that, our hero decides to start the interrogation, and the man happily agrees to answer whatever he can. So our hero asks why he was so curious about his work. Without a second's hesitation, the man says he needed to check for an awakened person. If there was one, they'd have to completely change their strategy. He was so relieved when the chief said no.
Our hero knew something like this was coming. The guy is already spilling more than he should.
It's like his mouth is moving on its own, and he's starting to panic. Shin then asks what they would do. What if there was an awakened? The survivor admits they'd lay low and wait for the perfect opportunity. The protagonist understands and asks if the lack of an awakened is what made them careless. Again, without thinking, he blurts out yes while wondering what in the world is happening to him. He realizes he's in deep trouble if this continues and makes a break for it. But the protagonist stops him. But Shin had one last question, freezing the man in his tracks against his will. Shin demanded to know his group's size and leader. Cornered, the man confessed. A group of 5 awakened, led by Park. Shin knew him as the guy who kept whining. He demanded to know their plans. The man smugly revealed they were taking over. After scouting for days, the group decided the base was full of weaklings. So, they chose that very night to launch their little coup d'etat. Our hero was stunned, but the man just laughed, saying the show was starting. In his mind, Shin couldn't believe this, but the villain couldn't leave a witness. He prepared to silence Shin now. A vortex of fire erupted from the survivor. He figured his powers were supreme. After all, who would fear a simple cook? For his part, Shin was surprised by the sudden, aggressive attack. With their identities exposed, the thug felt he had to eliminate the chef. As a fireball flew, our hero warned him, "You're underestimating a chef's power." A good cook is a master of fire, an ability Shin happened to possess. With his fire affinity, he simply dispersed the flames, proving the guy chose wrong. The man began to panic. His ultimate ability was undone by mere hands. The protagonist decided it was time to stop holding back his true skills. Using Chef's Eye, the system highlighted all of his opponent's weak points. Shin offered one warning: "You better get ready." The man could only ask, "What?" Before he could even think, Shin lunged forward, his kitchen knife finding its mark. Later, the rest of the group gathered, wondering why Chanjong hadn't shown up. Their leader, Park, looked grim, sensing something had gone terribly wrong. After a while, he declared they wouldn't wait. They'd start without Chanjong. But one member questioned it. Since the boy was their strongest fighter, the leader scoffed. It was 4 awakened against a bunch of nobodies. The worrier persisted. Chanjong was level 6 and possessed indispensable abilities. But Park, as their leader, couldn't be swayed by such concerns. He demanded their trust, insisting Chanjong would join them later. Now extremely irritated, he told everyone to hurry and gather all the people. Dragged into the courtyard, people began complaining about the late-night disturbance. Lee was also furious, asking Park what he was plotting. He feigned innocence. He simply replied that he enjoys leading people, a classic power tripper. The violent blonde had always been strangely polite in front of Lee, so she asked if being the group's big brother was no longer enough for him. Park declared their group was too small. With the whole unit, he'd be satisfied. In that moment, the girl finally understood his treacherous intentions. While they argued, the other civilians grumbled loudly about their situation. Inside, soldiers questioned the commotion. Just survivors arguing, they were told. But the other soldiers didn't like it. They were expected to obey on base. Outside, Lee knew this day would come. The boys were bound to cause trouble. Feeling she had no other choice, she pulled a pair of scissors from her pocket. The civilians panicked, wondering if these men were crazy enough to start a fight. But the blonde wasn't intimidated. He knew the true power of those scissors. Lee couldn't understand his confidence, thinking he had just 4 normal men. Before she could act, a second member stepped forward, ready to fight her alone. Lee noticed their strange confidence, even knowing her incredible abilities. And then she realized they were all awakened. The survivors had been deceived. Park's patience ran out. "If you won't yield," he roared, "then let the battle begin." Strategically, his goons targeted the civilians. But as their protector, the girl stepped up to shield them. Instantly, his partner flanked her, providing backup. He unleashed a flurry of golden orbs. Lee sliced through them, but felt a flicker of doubt. These guys were on another level, against 2 awakened. She wondered if she stood a chance. Meanwhile, the troublemaker's leader watched, completely unfazed by the chaos. He was certain of victory. A heavy blow landed as the lackey sneered. "Not bad for fighting zombies," his partner scoffed. "Enough games. Finish her." To Lee, however, their teamwork was a mess. This was her opening, her chance to turn the tables. The second man leaped, aiming for a swift end. Both of them were already level 4. He saw no path to defeat against a non-combat type. But then, a sharp sound echoed. Everything froze. The sound was a warning shot, fired by one of the soldiers. Seeing the chaos, the squad leader demanded, "What's going on here?" Naturally, the 3 instantly threw their hands up. The unit representative then commanded everyone to stand down, but Park just had to ask. "And if we don't?" The soldier's reply was chillingly clear. "We will open fire." The blonde just laughed. A soldier shooting civilians? How absurd. In response, the soldier stated this was an exception. Threats are to be eliminated. In his mind, the main character guessed this was their leader, realizing more awakened were hiding. Park, meanwhile, calmly declared that any intimidation would be met in kind. The boys still wondered if they'd truly face armed soldiers. The awakened were strong, but were they bulletproof? Strolling toward the squad, Park began to taunt them. He dared them to shoot, mocking the 20-year-old recruits for their lack of courage. The soldiers thought he was insane. One turned to their leader, Seosanuk, for orders. The leader had already given the warning. With no other choice, he pulled the trigger. But as everyone watched in horror click, nothing happened. Park seemed genuinely surprised. "Okay," he admitted, "maybe not all of you are children." But in the boy's mind, this made no sense. "The gun worked fine seconds ago." With a smug grin, Park explained it wasn't broken. The soldier would understand once he revealed his ability. Park's class was arsonist. His power was to interfere with all flame-related phenomena. Seo was stunned. His subordinate confirmed the entire unit's weapons were jammed. The blonde then elaborated. He controlled fire, and since rifles require combustion, he could simply turn them off. With so many soldiers present, Seo realized they weren't reckless. They had a plan. The two lackeys immediately started praising their big brother. But Lee knew that at this rate, the unit was doomed. Disarming the soldiers, Park bellowed, "Everyone, on your knees." But the soldiers whispered, if his power was only fire.
Interference. They weren't completely helpless. One asked Seo for the plan. He replied,
4 of them, so 4 of us will engage. He suggested using their superior numbers. The leader agreed, adding extra support for Lee. In response, Park just scoffed. Numbers mean nothing against an awakened. But Seo ignored him and dispatched Hanil and Dwin to handle the situation. Park's expression hardened. "Fine, I'll kill a few. To make an example, starting with you." But before he could finish, a fist flew
straight for his face. With no time to react, the blonde took a heavy blow to the jaw. Still reeling, he realized he'd been played. There was another awakened among the soldiers.
The leader of the troublemakers is on the ground. Everyone is completely shocked. Not even Lee expected an awakened one among the soldiers. Since the blonde went down in one punch, the soldier mocks him,
calling the man laughably weak. The other guy couldn't fathom why the blonde was acting so arrogant. Seeing this, Seo had to admit the unit was getting impressively strong. With the commotion over, anyone not needing medical care was sent back to the dorms. At the same time, Seo organized his soldiers as the rebels were restrained. Just then, Sergeant Hyung came running, but Seo assured him nothing major had occurred. As for the survivors, Seo warned, there were 5 other awakened users with the lady. They tried to take over the unit with a cheap trick, not that they were a real threat. Kwang spotted the blonde from the meeting, realizing it went down just as the hero predicted. The 4 fools walked right into the trap he had set. In any case, Seo couldn't find the 5th member, and right on cue, the protagonist appears, carrying him. After a long haul, our hero was beat. He was surprised the party was already over. He casually dropped the man, as Hung thanked him for his excellent work. The hero tried to brush it off, but the sergeant praised Shin's rapidly improving skills. At this sight, the survivors trembled. The fallen man was Chan Jung, their strongest fighter. Still, Hung thought he overdid it, but our hero insisted he was as gentle as he could be, his ingredient. Discernment skill usually starts by slicing the throat. The only problem is its intense bloodlust. Thankfully, he switched to his fish preparation skill, a technique which let him knock the guy out alive. Shin could now subdue people without killing them. With that, everything was settled. Hung was unimpressed by the rebels' actual strength. From what he'd seen, Kwang noted their average level was a mere 3. Meanwhile, the military had 6 newly awakened members at that very same level. Kwang then mentioned Shin's level, which had blown past 10, and the tokens they all still held. The stats get a huge boost at lower levels, making a level 1 into a level 5 instantly. Of course, the effect weakens over time. Still, our hero thanked everyone for their hard work. Hyung, however, wouldn't take all the praise. He declared they only got this far thanks to the protagonist. But then, Lee interrupted, asking if the soldiers were also awakened. Our hero was just glad to see she was safe. The girl explained she was only fine because of the soldiers' care. Shin was so relieved. She added that without them, everyone would have been lost. The hero then apologized for his secrecy, explaining it was a necessary precaution. Lee completely understood his reasons. So, the protagonist revealed a bombshell. Half the unit was now awakened. In his mind, the hero knew it was time to come clean. He remembered the girl's old job and told her that he's a chef who also does a few other things. The next day, Shin asked the soldier in the basement if anything was up. The guard said they expected an escape attempt, but the troublemakers hadn't even budged. When Shin asked for the room, the soldier pointed down the hall. With that, our hero wondered where they should begin the interrogation. The soldier asked if he would be all right alone. Shin just smiled. "This is my specialty," entering Chan Jong's room. The boy looked terrified, so the cook simply said he was there to talk. The hero stated he had some questions, asking if he'd cooperate. Chan Jong immediately begged for his life, promising to do anything. Shin was a bit taken aback, wondering if his one punch had caused that much trauma. The hero then promised he wouldn't get hit again. But first, Shin pulled out some ice cream, telling Chan Jong he had to eat after the interrogation. The protagonist was thrilled with his confession ice cream. It makes the eater brutally honest, and that's how the boy confessed they were all criminals. Apparently, the news about awakening made it hard to grow their influence. That's why the group bowed to the blonde. The criminal then hid his awakened status and joined Miss Lee's survivors. But stealing another's power isn't so simple. However, one of their members was an expert at sabotage. So much for their reputations. Turns out, these crooks were trying to quietly expand their influence. Chan Jung admits this is why they targeted the unit. It was a big fish.
but it also had a lot of weapons. Now, our hero understands Taijun's warning about hiding one's strength. After all, if they knew the battalion's
real power, they would have acted much more carefully. Taking survivors to their base
was a huge risk, and our hero wondered what to do with them. Later, the lieutenant reports he calmed the survivors as ordered, and there's nothing else important to mention.
Everyone is surprisingly calm now. As expected from a good officer, Shin is pleased to have someone so useful.
His powers of persuasion are impressive. The lieutenant then asks if he performed well, and our hero confirms he did. Hearing this, Kim nervously asks for a few snacks as his reward, and at this, our hero gets a bit worried. The man's withdrawal symptoms are only getting worse. Not hearing a quick reply, the lieutenant apologizes, saying 3 meals a day are plenty, but our hero agrees to make a snack to reward the soldier's good work, making him incredibly grateful. With that, the protagonist asks the lieutenant to wait in the dining hall. Kim happily hops away like a small child. Seeing this odd behavior, the hero thinks about putting the other 5 criminals through the same dependency. It's because they are just dead, wait if left alone. And Shin isn't in the mood to kill anyone. While cooking, he thinks he has to. Take action soon. Later, Shin appears before the blonde with a tray full of delicious food. After just the first bite, that serious, grumpy man smiles like never before. Naturally, our hero does the same for the whole group. He receives the Reformer achievement, obtained when an evil group submits to the power of the kitchen. In addition, the protagonist gets the Reform Cook title, which boosts his food's effect by 30%. For monsters and evil people. So now, these former criminals will be the unit's newest members. The next day, the group salutes the other soldiers and helps with the day's tasks. Seeing this, Shin asks how the newcomers are doing. Kwang says they're adapting well, even if they're a bit old. With that, everything seems to be resolved smoothly, so the hero says they'll stay newcomers until their reform is done.
At that moment, Hung comes running in a panic to find Shin. Our hero asks him what the rush is. The sergeant
replies that there is something Shin must see immediately. By then, the unit had collected all the remaining oil, but not counting vehicles. The generator will only last 1 more week. This is a big problem, as they're running out of food and electricity. For our hero, this was unavoidable. The arrival of the survivors threw all his original plans off course. One of the soldiers asks what to do, and Shin warns that they will prepare to abandon the base. Later that night, Hung says he now gets why the hero told them to skip dinner. It's because a spread of beautiful, fresh dishes was prepared for the soldiers to suit everyone's tastes. But the moment they took a bite, Shin revealed that it was actually lizard meat, turning the boys' joy into pure despair. Obviously, Hung angrily asks why. The hero is feeding them lizard meat, but the hero explains that until now, they have only fought lizards with obvious weaknesses. However, the young lady warned there are various monsters outside, including zombies and even some humanoid ones. In this case, they all must be prepared. Hung agrees, but he still
doesn't get why they must eat lizard meat. Shin explains that the unit's food supply is almost empty, except for the bare minimum of combat rations. Soldiers can still buy bread from the store to avoid starving, but that costs points and is difficult to cook. Luckily, monster meat contains magic and is therefore quite effective. In the end, what our hero is saying is that eating monster meat is their best choice. Hung
understands, but says many won't like this idea. In particular, lizard meat will be rejected by the soldiers, as they all saw their comrades killed in battle. Our hero knows this, which is why he is managing everyone's mental state through his cooking. Otherwise, the whole unit would have already collapsed from severe trauma. Even then, Shin could barely keep the situation stable. Eating monsters that eat people will surely be
a bitter pill to swallow. But Shin's resolve is iron. Worry is a luxury they don't have. Because as he said,
survival is the unit's only mission, so a choice must be made. Will they salvage what they can? It was simple eat or be eaten. Shin earnestly asked for his soldiers' trust. The next day,
Hung summoned the troops for the hero's special cuisine. At that, the soldiers commented, relieved,
that they could finally eat something fresh. Some still doubted it was monster meat. But the moment they tasted it, their entire worldview shattered. It wasn't just good, it boosted their stats. This was an incomparable meal, unlike anything before. Hung cheered that the plan was a massive success, and Shin had to agree, though a few stragglers remained. Seeing this, the sergeant told the hero not to worry, he knew everyone would come around. Then, Hung roared for all to hear that. They couldn't just end the party like this, and so he called for the hidden soju and beer. Soon, Hyung admitted he always hid drinks after meetings, which sent the battalion into a frenzy. With roaring laughter, the soldiers hauled out the crates. The party had begun. Shin was very happy. It had been ages since he saw them so joyful. Suddenly, Miss Lee appeared, leaving.
Our hero completely stunned. She said the barracks were empty, so she came here.
After hearing the commotion, Shin quickly tried to explain, saying it's not something they would force on the survivors. It'd be bad if civilians thought the good stuff was for soldiers and the bad for them. Lee, however, already knew about the monster meat, and although it seemed strange, she understood it was inevitable for survival. But in any case, she had a request, a shocking one to formally enlist all survivors into the unit. Our hero was taken aback. Civilians wanted to join the fight, but Lee clarified that while protection is nice, they need to learn to defend themselves.
Her attitude filled the protagonist with pride. She was thinking like a true leader in any
case. Shin said this was all very sudden, but Lee revealed they'd discussed it since Chang's betrayal, which made sense. Without their interference, the civilians would have never been able to stop them. The hero asked if she had considered everyone else's opinion, and in response, she affirmed she did. So, Shin explained that they are trained soldiers, which means that upon joining, they must follow their superiors' orders. But Lee didn't mind, as from what she had seen, Lieutenant Kim was competent enough to lead them. The girl just didn't know Kim was only like that because he was following Shin's orders. But he decided to explain that later, understanding Lee's request. He promised to discuss it with his superiors. Then Lee smiled and thanked him, vowing they would do their best not to lag behind. After that, our hero told the others about her request, leaving everyone in disbelief. Seo asked if it was too much of a burden, since they were already struggling. However, they couldn't just leave the civilians, defenseless to die when they left. In that case, the CO questioned if all survivors agreed. To this, Shin replied yes. They had agreed to fight the same war. Certainly, many risks were involved, and the soldiers couldn't predict the dangers ahead. However, they had to join forces to protect the civilians and survive together. This was their duty as humans and soldiers, which effectively closed the debate. Later, the girl asked our hero to see what she had prepared. And since Lee had made so many uniforms by herself, he knew she was dead serious. This was a set of military gear from monster leather, with the command staff's armor made from the boss's hide, and the others from regular mobs. Lee explained that since the lizards had strong defensive
power, she put it to good use. And though the scales are tough, they are a bit thick, so the
girl reinforced only the most critical areas. In any case, she asked our hero to try it on. The moment he wore it, the outfit granted our hero various effects. For being made by a novice tailor, the system noted the armor greatly, increases physical resistance, and improves attribute resistance. The protagonist thought this was incredible, especially when stacked with the meal buffs. Lee, for her part, praised our hero, who thanked her for the comfortable fit. Changing the subject, Shin asked why she made the outfit gray, and in response, she explained that, anticipating a future trip to the city, she crafted several specialized designs. The officer and soldier versions differed, with the leader's uniform boasting superior durability. In a surprise twist, Shin reveals he's the unit commander now, leaving Lee completely baffled. Though a little overdue, our hero decides it's finally time to reveal everything. Once she learns their secrets, she will truly become one of them. He asks her to keep it confidential. A short while later, the soldiers gathered to inspect their new gear. The new uniforms were a huge hit. With this material, avoiding injuries would be much easier. Everyone was buzzing with excitement. The leaders thanked her, but she insisted it was a team effort. For warriors needing extra defense, she designed the uniforms to be worn with armor underneath. For the marksmen, she added pouches for extra clips. And for our hero, she included a custom sheath right on the belt. Lee also set aside uniforms for the lieutenant in Taejun, which our hero offered to deliver. Changing the subject, he suggested she make a uniform for herself, too. After all, she was now the official survivor representative, practically a squad leader. But she wondered if being a representative even mattered after joining their unit. Our main character admits that it doesn't, but warns that they plan to leave the unit soon. When they depart, other survivors will seek refuge here, and the military will need her to look after them. Realizing the weight of the position, she's thrilled, blushing slightly, hung, praises Lee, confident she'll do great. Speaking from experience, Shin confirms the girl
will adapt to the new role. He too felt overwhelmed when appointed leader. But humans are
adaptable creatures. Just then, the CO hands her a K5 model pistol, typically given to field officers or special personnel. When the monsters attacked, this unit lost its battalion commander, its order officer, and its military doctor, leaving these sidearms without an owner. Lee, however, had never even held a weapon like this. So, Seiya was tasked with giving her a crash course. Kwang then asked who. The other two pistols were for... Hung explains one went to the lieutenant, for the sake of officer dignity, and because his combat skills were lacking. The final one is being claimed by the battalion commander himself. Shin explained that while he used a blade, it had its limits. Since he's not a frontline fighter, he decided to use the pistol. Kwang seemed less than thrilled, but Hung reassured him that a low-caliber weapon like that was basically a toy to them. A few days later, another soldier awakened. With 100 awakened members, the guild requirements were finally met. The system declared that a guild is a structured society, requiring positions and rules. This created the perfect opportunity for Shin to make his exit. When leaving the base was suggested, it caused an uproar, just as expected. Many soldiers argued it was a death sentence for civilians to survive in that jungle. Even those who kept quiet trembled with anxiety. But if they remained locked away, they would stagnate and go mad. To truly survive, they had to leave. Some understood the logic, like Hung, who asked for the plan. For our hero, the answer was simple. It was time to cook another meal infused with liquid courage. With all the survivors gathered, the hero realized just how many people there were. But it felt right. He had brought them all together, now united. Hung urged them to take the next step. Just then, the system announced that the leader could appoint deputies to help manage the guild's functions and administration. These deputies could even communicate remotely via a message system. But the guild still needed a name. The system prompted the hero to choose one. It seemed they were the very first guild to be formed. After all, gathering 100 awakened people is an incredible challenge. They even received a dragon's tooth for their achievements. For now, the hero focused on appointing deputies and naming their new guild. With a megaphone, Shin announced they had reached 100 awakened members. They were the first in the nation. For that, he congratulated everyone. He declared that as long as they grew stronger, they would, ready to march forward with newfound confidence. But before they could leave the base, some critical matters needed attention. Shin announced that as the guild expanded, he would appoint deputies. A total of 5 positions were open. Becoming a deputy would amplify the emblem's buff, a seriously tempting power-up. And our protagonist made it clear he would select exactly 5. Out in the wild, a single unit would be far too vulnerable, which is precisely where sub-commanders came in. Now, his soldiers' lives were on the line, so the appointments had to be perfect. As guildmaster, Shin could have chosen them himself, but he wanted to hear everyone else's opinion. Thankfully, after some debate, there wasn't much disagreement. Within the unit, the senior members Shin had in mind, including the lady, were obvious choices. The real problem was Taejun and his wheelchair. Because of this, murmurs spread, questioning if someone better was available. The sergeant was a good person, sure, but he could barely walk. Shin completely understood their concerns. In this case, Shin announced that Sergeant Park would not be leaving the base. At this, the soldiers were utterly baffled. Weren't they all supposed to be leaving? Even the seniors were confused, and Hung voiced their question. Our hero then explained that the mountain was their one and only base. So, if all the troops left, they would lose the occupation effect. Besides, the system message was clear: as long as they held the territory, they would earn occupation points. The more they controlled, and for longer, the more points they would earn. For now, the soldiers had no idea what these points were for. But it seemed this game was all about territorial warfare. Taejun, seizing the moment, asked for the megaphone. With all eyes on him, he explained that his class was an astronomer, the better. His view of the stars, the more he could use his skills. And no place had a better view than their base. That's why he chose to stay, to gather intel and transmit information, acting as a radar for the unit. And besides him, 7 other soldiers volunteered for the new detection squad. After the boy's speech, there were no more objections. And just like that, the 5 awakened guild members were chosen. With that, a new command structure was formed. Most importantly, it was time to choose a guild name. At first, someone suggested something like the Gangwon Liberation Front, but they wouldn't just stay in Gangwon. Another suggested they be the Sane Knights of the Round Table, but his friend thought Steel Unit sounded way cooler. This was because the first monster they ever fought was a steel lizard. But after a long and heated debate, one name pleased everyone: Steel. Legion, now ready for departure. Hung asked where to go. Seo suggested either east or west. Hong argued for the west, which had large cities like Chuncheon with plenty of territory. What's more, there were other military bases in that huge area. But on the other hand, the eastern Yeongdong region had their former superiors unit and was close to the sea. The question was, should they expand their territory or search for their old command?
It was a tough choice. So Shin had an idea he let Taeyun decide a few days later. As night began to fall, everyone gathered to leave. And among the sub-commanders and their many subordinates stood Shin. The day before, the newly appointed officers were discussing how they hadn't even secured their entire mountain area yet. Because of this, they prepared a map to assist in the conquest. Hyung commented he wanted to get familiar with it before leaving, but Gwang questioned what the parts marked with an X meant. The sergeant explained grimly that those were recent monster sightings. Seo couldn't hide his shock at seeing so. Many of them, since they already fought some daily, the real number had to be staggering. In the end, this mission was becoming a headache. Instead of decreasing, the monster population was only increasing. Moreover, there were recent reports of bizarre creatures, not just lizards. And without knowing the weaknesses of these monsters, it would be impossible to fight them without overwhelming firepower. At this, Hung questioned how the girl had made it to their unit and if she'd faced any trouble. She then explained that there were monsters, yes, but not nearly as many as were being reported now. On her entire journey, she only dealt with one or two, and they weren't even the lizard type. Since Lee took them out alone, Hung figured these new monsters wouldn't be a problem. In light of this, Shin suggested this was the boss's effect, leaving everyone stunned. The last rescue mission was pure luck. They waltzed in 2 days after the boss fell. It seems they entered the mountain range when lizard numbers were at an all-time low. Then, Seo stated the obvious. Conditions now were far worse, even with more soldiers and supplies to manage. That's why this required a flawless plan. Hung agreed, urging them to prepare for absolutely everything. Later, the military convoy finally departed. Arriving at the drop point, Kwang gave the order. Initiate perimeter defense. The survivor vehicles were sent ahead while other soldiers covered the rear. As the plan unfolded, Shin remarked that despite the chaos, their experience would see them through. This was a classic RPG party formation. You've got your tanks, damage dealers, and healers. The large trucks formed barriers at the front and back, with melee fighters positioned all around. Inside, ranged and support awakened would protect. The vehicles carrying the survivors. The only catch: they had no idea where the enemy would spawn. Plus, this narrow path was a total death trap. The hero's plan was to block any attack instantly. But Hung argued for a high-speed escape. Our main character understood his logic. These mountain roads were rough, unpaved nightmares, not to mention the sheer cliffs on certain parts. Driving here was dangerous on a good day, so flooring it was the best choice. But a reckless move could get the entire battalion wiped out. As the formation set, a soldier asked, "Should we move out now?" Minutes later, the convoy crept forward as soldiers scanned. The perimeter? Survivors were in the safe zone, while commanders played RTS from the outside. A soldier noted how strangely quiet it was. Kwang just warned. That's about to change. The territorial effect was ending. A strange noise confirmed it. The soldier asked, terrified, "Sergeant, you heard that?" Kwang nodded grimly. "Inform the main unit, now!" As the kid ran, a horde of lizard monsters erupted from the shadows, swarming the vehicles. At that moment, all survivors were secured inside. Shin roared for the troops to form up just like in training. Focus on weak points, conserve your energy, and no rifles. We don't need the noise. The awakened obeyed instantly. All the squad leaders were itching to show off their skills, and Shin was no exception, diving right into the fray, wasting no time. The monsters charged. The formation held firm as the military fought to keep the beasts from breaking through. Amid the chaos, Kwang heard a scream and delivered a bone-shattering punch to a lizard. He moved like lightning, taking down 2 more. You've got to be at least boss level to get my attention. He absolutely wrecked the beast. He tossed its body aside, but he didn't realize the others were using corpses as ramps to climb onto the trucks. Hung wasn't slacking either, saving a comrade with a blast of electricity. He yelled, "Don't just hide behind the barrier. Push them back before they can climb." One awakened maintained a shield, while another desperately held a monster back from the survivors. Though surrounded, the soldiers were somehow managing the onslaught. But inside, the civilians could only hear the terrifying clash of battle and tremble. Seeing this, Lee remembered his duty, comforting them. "Our soldiers will definitely win." Outside, the sergeant wrapped his weapon in a dark aura and cut down every beast in his path, launching one corpse onto the climbers below. However, this small victory was short-lived. The war was far from over. Another, even larger swarm was already approaching from the distance. The monsters rushed in, coming from all directions. "Where are they coming from?" Hung cried out. Shin explained that once a battle starts, the noise is just a dinner bell. "If we had used our guns," he said,
We'd be buried in a lizard tsunami by now. But since they were still far, Shin ordered the elimination of the remaining lizards so they could escape. The rear was reported clear, with just 2 left, near the survivors area. From atop a truck, Shin yelled, "It's time for combat actions. A new swarm is on its way." With that, the soldiers pulled out the secret weapons prepared by their commander. Snacks. One soldier felt relieved, utterly exhausted. Shin, meanwhile, called Hyung over to enjoy the meal, since they'd soon swap places with Kwang. After they ate, a system message appeared. All attributes had risen by 5, especially endurance. Our hero then unsheathed his kitchen knife and asked if the soldiers were prepared. As they readied to move, he realized he couldn't use this kitchen again. Outside, cooking would be difficult, even dangerous. The scent and smoke would broadcast their position. Plus, cooking gear would be scarce, so until they secured a base camp, everyone would survive on combat rations. Still, even this supply wouldn't be enough, lasting only about a week. But luckily, our hero had a new
Skill he got at level 10 combat rations. While its stats were lower than fresh meals, these
rations had a great shelf life and high calories. While on the move, dehydrated meat was the perfect portable option. And with no shortage of lizards, Shin figured he could turn their packaged lunch into actual combat rations. Back in the present, the order was given to reposition and for the injured
soldiers to rotate out. This had to be done fast, using the lizard corpses to form a barricade. Shin ordered team leaders to check on their members. After a damage report, the hero ran off, telling Hyung he'd be right back. The fixed stat increase and the jerky's endurance boost were helpful, but not enough. That's why Shin approached Lieutenant Kim, who was clearly surprised to see him. Without wasting time, our hero said it was time for Kim to use his commander skill.
The lieutenant understood but admitted he was still nervous. Regardless, he decided to try, and as he activated his power, he yelled for everyone to prepare for battle. A command order was issued. Resonating
with every soldier in the area, the skill granted allies a temporary battle-ready effect. When fighting,
in formation, their combat power rose, and they gained immunity to confusion. The lieutenant's power boosted allies' attributes, stacking with the meal's effects and the
courage buff. Just then, the monsters began their assault, and suddenly,
every sector was under watch. The fight was brutal, but the soldiers tried to hold out, believing they could make their escape. Each one fought several monsters, but one soldier faltered and took a direct hit to the gut. Just then, Shin dropped from above, plunging his knife into a beast's chest. He kept moving, cutting down everything in his way. One of them tried to slice him in 2, but he dodged and countered instantly. At this, the protagonist thought the buff effect was incredible. Now, they could definitely overcome this crisis. But the one getting the most praise was Lee. Shin glanced over and saw the girl, handling 5 monsters at once. A smile crept onto his face. She must have felt cooped up in the truck. But either way, it was time to end this. Any lizards that weren't too mangled would become their next meal. A commotion started as the unit checked on its wounded soldiers. Kwang was handling the remaining monsters, so Huck was put on perimeter check. Hung was assigned to check on survivors and secure an escape route as the battalion had to leave by sunset. With everyone's roles clear, our hero sheathed his knife for a moment. In total, there were about 10 injured. Luckily, it seemed everyone could be treated. Thanks to the hero's meal, the soldier giving the report offered his sincere gratitude. But the protagonist knew he had much more to improve. Shin's skill level was still too low, so he could only make jerky, the most basic combat ration. However, the idea that the effects could get even better made the soldier who praised him a little bit scared. Besides, with over 100 soldiers, the meal's effect would increase with the number of people eating. In any case the military had to move, the hero told the boy to make room in the trucks for those who couldn't walk. With things mostly organized, Shin went to a vehicle that was having issues. Arriving there, the soldiers told him the vehicle was beyond repair. Hearing this, our hero said it was a shame, but then asked about the other vehicles. They were sturdy, the soldiers reported, from what's still working. Either way, Shin is frustrated. Their journey just began and it's already an uphill battle. A soldier adds that their vehicles aren't reliable, they're not armored, not tanks, and can be easily destroyed. For now, their hands are tied. The best plan is to find some scrap materials. So, they agree to strip the vehicle for parts. Later, as darkness falls, the company gathers. Some eat, others stand guard. The guild deputies approach Arshi's hero to plot their next move on the map. The long night passes, dawn breaks, and the soldiers march on towards the new territory.
Suddenly, a soldier runs up, yelling for Shin to come see something. Noticing his urgency,
The hero asks if he's found anything. The answer is yes. At the scene, Kwang is already investigating a section
of metal fence that's been utterly demolished. Shin questions how, wondering if it was those lizards from before. Kwang confirms the likelihood. But to our hero, this looks far from accidental. In this case, he spots distinct tire tracks, recalling the soldiers sent out earlier. These are clear signs that a vehicle crashed here. Shin immediately demands binoculars. Then, after scanning carefully into the ravine's depths, the hero spots it. A military vehicle the very same, one that Jamin and Sunho used for their mission. It's the aftermath of a crash. Our hero relays his discovery to everyone, realizing this is where their comrades fell. The soldiers are visibly shaken. Shin can only wonder what the hell happened. The first lieutenant made a grave error by approving that mission. Even if they were volunteers, Shin feels he should have forbidden it. Back then, they weren't even awakened. They were defenseless against any monster. The thought haunts the protagonist, that if they hadn't descended the mountain, they'd still be alive. Yet, strangely, there are no bodies in sight, even with the soldiers having died nearby. Kwang suggests they might have survived and escaped somewhere else. But Shin knows a fall from that height would injure even an awakened, which leads our
hero to a grim conclusion. They became lizard food. A pang of regret hits Shin, but it's the most logical theory they have. Still, a bad feeling lingers. He can't shake the sense that something far worse is coming. Regardless, Shin knows the unit has no time for dread. Later, Hung expresses his shock at the missing bodies. The hero admits he can't explain it either. In any case, they must keep making combat rations. Supplies are dangerously low, and Hong agrees as
they now have a massive stockpile of lizard meat. Ultimately, Shin knows he'll have to cook on the go. The squad can't survive without jerky deep in enemy lands. Minutes later, another monster horde appears, swarming to attack the battalion from all sides. Hyung desperately orders everyone to hold the line,
because breaking formation means certain death. But to the sergeant's dismay, the sheer number of them is beginning to overwhelm the soldiers. Lee and the other guild deputies are also fighting fiercely. But it's uncertain if they can hold out. Inside a truck, our hero works against the clock. This is already the group's fourth battle. He's been stuck making jerky and hasn't joined the fight, so Shin can only hope everything turns out okay. Fortunately, the soldiers handle the monsters, but 5 are injured and 1
is in critical condition. Shin worries as their casualty count steadily rises. Thanks to the meals
and Lieutenant Kim's buff, the soldiers' stats are up despite their exhaustion. But all the commotion from the fighting keeps attracting more monsters. Changing topics, Hyung warns that there are some complaints about Shin for not joining the battles. Our hero understands their point of view,
but his combat skills are pathetic compared to the warriors. Therefore, focusing his efforts
on making combat rations is his best contribution. Hyung, however, isn't one of the critics. He warns that he will shut up those fools running their mouths. But Shin doubts it'll be as simple as the sergeant says. Suddenly, a soldier desperately calls for them. Something strange has appeared on the road, and they rush to investigate. Without a second thought, the 3 sprint towards a cave. But as they get there, a chilling sight greeted them in the cave. Inside stood 2 soldiers, their forms twisted and grotesque. They were zombified, yet still wore their military fatigues.
Panic filled the air. But as Kwang saw their unit tags, he realized who these
zombies were. Jamin and Sunho, the 2 corporals from Lieutenant Kim's expedition mission. Our hero never saw this coming. Hyung quickly took charge, shouting that he'd give the orders. With a roar, the sergeant ordered them forward to get the survivors into the vehicles. But looking through his binoculars again, Kwang saw they were armed and advancing on their position, leaving the soldiers completely stunned. Even in death, Jamin and Sunho could still aim their rifles without wasting time. The order came down, everyone duck. They braced for the incoming shots. After a lot of chaos, the zombies opened fire. The military thankfully managed to defend themselves with their tactical shields, but shots peppered the vehicles, and one struck Mattel square in the chest. Our hero was desperate, yelling that he would call a medic immediately. However, despite the hellish pain, the boy grabbed Shin, saying the uniform saved him. Our protagonist was incredibly relieved. Obviously, the soldiers told Shin to check again. The hero was seriously impressed with the suit's quality. Despite the chaotic gunfire, there were no fatal injuries, but the monsters kept on, advancing, their guns now silent. At this, the soldiers realized what that meant. The zombies were probably out of ammo. Hyung actually laughed, thinking they weren't smart enough. to reload a rifle. The sergeant then ordered the warrior squad to attack before the zombies
Could react. Kwang led the charge with 2 others. Unexpectedly, the soldiers took down the Shenshen
zombies with shocking ease. In just a few seconds, the situation was resolved. Still, Kwang felt a faint
pang of regret for fighting his former comrades. When the fight ended, Shin and Hyung
agreed it was over, though they were shaken. But at that moment, a massive flock of crows took flight, screaming in terror. Everyone wondered what was happening as the mountain suddenly grew restless. The military could feel vibrations in the ground. At this, Hyung
questioned if this was what he feared. The hero confirmed it. The gunfire meant Odin did all the monsters were coming. The sergeant asked what they should do now, knowing the unit had no time to
hesitate. Our hero announced their stealthy approach was officially over. With that, the shooters were ordered to prepare with the mages, who had to remove all firepower restrictions. At this point, it was necessary for the unit to use everything they had. For the long-range Awaken, Shin sent them to Truck 2.5, saying, for support. As for the warriors, their job was to run at full speed and kill any monsters that appeared. Our hero warned that escaping the mountain range was their only real chance of survival. This sent everyone scrambling to their positions. The hero went to the driver, who informed him it would take 30 minutes to get out. So, Shin said he'd put a shooter in the passenger seat. With that, all the soldiers, except the warriors, began boarding the vehicles as the shooters got into position on top. Then, as everyone got organized, Shin steeled himself, determined to make it out of this place alive. However, this would be their biggest battle yet. In addition to the lizards, monsters of all shapes and sizes were approaching. The moment the monsters arrived, the warriors met the first wave head on. From a distance, our hero yelled not to let the vehicles be blocked. The warriors held the path ahead. With a powerful advance, Kwang ordered everyone to fall back. He was making a charge that sent the monsters flying like bowling pins. After that, he warned that the vehicle was slowing down, and he needed help from the other warriors. From atop the vehicles, the shooters did their job, and Huck yelled for more ammo. A support soldier replied that he would bring it right away. But suddenly, he spotted a new horde of monsters pouring down the ravine. They were monstrous wolves, and because of this, the soldiers grew cautious of their frightening appearance. Then one soldier called the hero to see what was happening. These things seemed much stronger, and seeing them left the protagonist completely in shock. The creatures had 6 limbs and were so fast the warriors couldn't even get close. Moreover, they looked absolutely ravenous. It was clear these were far more feral than the lizards. In this, Shin wondered how to proceed. Moving vehicles through here would be a nightmare. But just then, an idea sparked in his mind. On the front lines, barrier users struggled, holding back the monstrous onslaught. The wolves were too strong. One man screamed he couldn't hold on. But before the line broke, chunks of meat suddenly flew through the air. The moment they sailed past the wolves, the beasts instantly changed targets, snatching the food. A soldier stared, shocked they cared more for lizard meat, with plenty in stock. Our hero announced he'd keep the buffet coming. This was exactly what the protagonist had predicted. The monsters had surrounded them, ready for the kill, but calmed the second they saw the meat. It was clear now. These were nothing like the cunning, tactical lizards. If food was in front of them, they'd chase it. If Shin found their weaknesses now, the unit could seize an easy victory. Analyzing the beasts, his cooking skill revealed the wolves' fatal flaw. When distracted, they were disorganized and vulnerable. The lizard meat worked perfectly as bait, letting the riflemen pick them off. Soon, the military overcame this new crisis. Shin realized if this worked once, lizard meat could be their secret weapon. Thanks to his plan, the unit handled every crisis that followed with ease. By adding his special sauce to the meat, Shin even enhanced the distraction effect. They also learned the better the dish, the stronger the lure. After baiting a new wave, Shin used his chef's eye, calling out the weak points to the warriors. This time, the horde's weakness was their legs. Everyone followed the sergeant's commands. The battalion calmly controlled the fight once more. Later, as the unit pressed on, some could finally see the end of the mountain path. Some were worried, others relieved. But unlike them all, Hung was practically vibrating with excitement. Though Shin felt it too, he couldn't show it. He worried he'd overdone it with his abilities. His eyes ached, and his head was spinning. For the first time, our main character felt true mana exhaustion and collapsed, leaving the entire battalion panicked for their commander. Sometime later, our hero awoke in a bed, drenched in a cold sweat. Beside him, Hung asked if he was all right. "No," Shin croaked. I feel like I'm dying." He then asked where they were. Hung explained they found an empty cabin and made camp. Getting right to it, the sergeant offered him some porridge made from combat rations. But Shin could tell he just threw everything in a pot and boiled it. Hung reported that monsters appeared right after they left the mountains.
But the unit took care of business. Shin asked if he remembered to bring the monster corpses.
And he confirmed it. He knew the meat and skins were valuable resources. Kwang and the others were outside harvesting them, with Lee on production. Everyone was working hard. Just then, a soldier arrived. The exploration team was back. Hung told the hero to rest while he handled it, but Shin stopped him. It was his turn to get up and take command. Initially, Taejun wanted to head west, thinking their luck would be better there. But to Seo Hayak, that direction was a suicide mission. From his scouting, that place was basically hell. The chaos from the monsters just attracted more monsters, and humans they killed turned into zombies. The village was now overrun with zombies and beasts, a terrible situation. Hearing this, Shin knew that walking into that nest would put them at a major disadvantage. Furthermore, the many buildings and cars would severely limit their visibility, making it tough to move off the main roads. Yet the military hadn't given up on the area. Shin suggested they focus on strengthening their forces and healing the wounded. The guild's 2 healers were already overwhelmed. If more people got hurt, the unit was finished. Their men would be wiped out. Huck desperately asks for a plan, and our hero's mind starts churning. Just then, a light bulb moment hits him. He suggests hiding in their own barracks. Hyung instantly buys into this genius-level scheme, since this place is a goldmine of resources. Better yet, the barracks are out in the open, just a short trek away, making the journey far less dangerous. Out here, securing a base of operations is priority number 1. And this spot is the perfect candidate for their new HQ. Before dusk, our hero calls a meeting with all the top brass. The verdict: they won't risk everyone at once, deciding instead to split into 3 separate squads. Each team gets a captain, but since firearms are a no-go, the marksman is stuck on cabin duty.
Besides, their ammo is already critically low, a fact Hayak can't argue with. Lee also gets a promotion to squad leader. She's not exactly popular, so this is her chance to prove herself.
But as a city survivor, her knowledge of the urban jungle is absolutely indispensable. Against some protests, the hero adds an awakened survivor to each team. Sure, they're a little different.
But these conditioned fighters will follow any order, so long as there's a snack waiting for them. With the plan set,
our hero just prays it all goes smoothly. The next morning, Shin announces they'll be taking separate routes to stay under the radar. The teams will split up and meet later. Everyone nods in agreement as Shin declares, it's time to move out. The civilians see them off with hopeful prayers. A while into their march, Shin gets curious. He asks Lee why most survivors are in the cities. She explains they had no choice. It was the only place to find food. Monsters were terrifying, sure, but starvation was a far greater horror. Lee admits she's incredibly thankful for the steady meals here. Every day before was a desperate struggle. Shin then wonders if the city was a tough place to survive. But recalling what the hero said, Lee corrects him. For regular people, the blocked sightlines were actually an advantage. Survivors could duck and weave between the concrete giants when danger appeared. Out in the open, that tactic is useless, and they would have been caught eventually. Shin realizes their disadvantage was a civilian's lifeline. Changing the subject, he asks if others are still holed up in the city. Lee thinks it's likely. After all, the military can't be the only ones who made it. But the thought still makes Shin uneasy. This is why they're on this mission, to find resources and new allies. They need to expand to survive. But if the military just starts accepting anyone?
What's to stop criminals from sneaking in? The possibility is already giving our hero a major headache.
Suddenly, during their trek, Lee senses something. She quickly calls for them to halt. Shin immediately asks what's wrong. She whispers that she can hear faint breathing nearby, probably zombies.
A quick scan confirms her fears. Zombies are ahead, but luckily for them,
they haven't been spotted yet. Without their captain, they'd be in serious trouble, especially since the unit is still green. Lee explains that zombies are weaker than monsters, but they can be dangerously unpredictable, sometimes retaining old habits. As an example, she points to a zombie lurking inside a sewer pipe. It's hiding, she says, waiting to ambush anyone who gets close. A classic trap. The hero asks if there's any way to detect them beforehand. Lee explains that, with an awakened's hearing, you can pick up their breathing if you really concentrate. So for now, Shin realizes, their hearing is the only early warning system. They need a new strategy, and they need it fast. Minutes later, the hero briefs the entire unit on what he's learned. He tells everyone to focus and gather their weapons. They'll need large swords for this one. Going in together would be too complicated. So, only the captain and a small vanguard will advance, while the others secure the perimeter. With the plan set, our protagonist gives the signal. His team moves out, quickly entering the location. Inside, the members split into two groups. But before they can move further, they hear it. The chilling sound of zombie breaths, echoing from all directions. A nervous Hung warns that there are too many. It's impossible to pinpoint their positions. Lee adds she's never seen so many zombies in one place. And to make matters worse, Shin recognizes some of his former superiors among the horde. The mission is looking way too risky. Our hero decides it's time to retreat, and Hung agrees. But just as the hero
orders Kwang to lead the way out, a zombie launches itself right at the boy, nearly ending the officer's life.
Just in time. A blade met the zombie's neck. Everyone stared, shocked to see who made the move. It was our hero, of course. Shin roared for them to run. A horde of zombies was closing in fast. And as they sprinted, his only command was simple, don't you dare slow down. After that chaotic escape, the group thankfully made it out of the base. But that zombie, it was Sergeant Park from their own battalion, a fact that didn't go unnoticed. The hero confirmed it. He recognized the man despite his new look. He said you can still tell who they are. Hyung knew that, deep down. These were still their former comrades, their superiors. In fact, that hesitation could be fatal in a fight. As Shin considered this problem, he realized it had been too long since his men had a proper morale-boosting meal. Ever since the unit found Jane and Songho, the soldiers' fear had grown. Shin admitted he had considered scouting another area, but insisted they had to clear the barracks first, and the reason for this mental health management, which, of course, earned him some confused looks. The hero explained that this fight is just for now, but finding survivors would give them real hope. And Lee agreed. Knowing something like that would be a massive boost to morale and courage. Hung, however, still thought the plan was completely insane. But our hero countered that a rescue mission has a real purpose, unlike just aimless scouting. The officers debated it, but finally agreed to hear him out. With that, the military began to
strategize their assault on the barracks. But since the buildings were basically enclosed,
dungeons, our hero knew this would be tough. Hung's brilliant idea, bring all the mages to just nuke the place with overwhelming firepower. Surprisingly, our hero actually considered it, but only as a plan B. Before revealing plan A, though, Shin called them over for a meal. As he cooked, the protagonist mused that their power wasn't the issue. But a simple stat boost wouldn't cut it here. That's why he was cooking up olive oil ears, a delicacy said to help you
pinpoint predators and prey, perfect for tracking zombies. On top of that, the hero infused
a sense of calm into the dish. And since it was made with magic ingredients, it packed an amplified
punch. Later, the soldiers dug in, delighted it tasted just like pork neck. Then, all their
stats jumped by 5, and a hearing magic skill activated. One guy pointed out a strange, new line in his status window, but the others told him to stop shouting. That's when they realized. They now had super sensitive hearing. And before a fight broke out, Shin knew. It was time to move. Sprinting through the city, they could now hear the zombies long before
they ever saw them. They ambushed the monsters with devastating attacks, giving them zero chance to react.
A soldier yelled about one hiding in a wardrobe, while another begged him to be quieter. They could now pinpoint enemies by sound alone. Lee himself was in disbelief. But there was a tiny downside. Their ears were killing them. The hero guessed their brains probably weren't ready for this audio upgrade. But against dumb zombies, just locating them was enough to stay safe. At this rate, the mission would be over in a flash. Suddenly, a zombie appeared out of nowhere, but our hero reacted instantly, driving his blade straight into the monster's skull and dropping it, lifeless to the ground. That was new. Some zombies were attacking silently. Shin knew they'd overstayed their welcome. He gave the order move to the officers' building on the next floor. If their luck held, this mission would be a clean sweep. But when they reached the next floor, the hero was stunned to see Hung already there. The guy smugly informed him he was late. While Kwang reported most of the monsters were already toast, one soldier said he almost felt bad for the zombies. They were just that clueless. But one target remained the unit's former commander, Major Kwak Han Jung. Seeing his highest-ranking officer like this sent a chill down Shin's spine. Kwak was nothing like the hesitant Lieutenant Kim. He was a true soldier, and everyone respected his skill as their commander. So our hero announced he would personally see the man off. Everyone understood and agreed. As the Steel Legion's master, this was Shin's duty to handle. Even so, slightly wary, our hero draws his blade to face the monster. A fierce battle ignites between them, with the Major leading the assault. Shin immediately senses that this one's spirit is unlike any of the other zombies.
Undead horde. And yet, our hero finishes him with ease. A single, clean strike ends it. Even in a moment,
Like this, he reflects on the commander's unyielding military spirit. So, as he takes the monster's head, he vows to build a guild in his honor, a guild he will forge into a powerful organization and protect with his very life. Later, the surviving soldiers gather together. The unit holds a simple
burial for their fallen comrades. The zombie corpses are gathered, and the flames consume the monsters.
A profound sadness hangs over them all. Every man lost was a superb soldier and a great friend. Our hero says his final goodbyes, praying they rest in peace. With the funeral now concluded, he urges everyone to focus on the living. Once the somber goodbyes were over, the real work of building a new temporary base began. Hyung's group took on the first task. Their mission was to scrub the area clean of any zombie traces. Meanwhile, Lee's survivors headed out to get water from the nearby stream. As for Kwang's team, their job was gathering wood and lighting torches before the sun went down. Finally, our hero and Seo Hyuk discussed defenses. They needed a perimeter just like their old base. Based on the map layouts, clear sightlines for mages and shooters were top priority. They agreed to begin the work at once. Later, Shin admits he'd love a party, like the one before, but it just wasn't possible yet. He could feel their disappointment, knowing full well that they all needed a break. But the real work was just beginning. It was time to decide the guild's next move. At this point, Hong steps up, placing a hand on our hero's shoulder. He declares that, as they all knew, the battalion's goal was expansion. But right now, they lacked the resources to even survive. So he'd prepared a little list, outlining everything the unit currently desperately needed. But one soldier had a question, specifically about the lack of food. They'd collected tons of meat already. Right. The kid had a point, of course, but a diet of only meat isn't sustainable. Shin himself wasn't sure about his mana, which manifests in the bodies of the awakened. Could it maintain their health without proper nutrients? It was a huge gamble. In this case, Hong warns they might last a month on meat alone, but after that, who knew what would happen? And that wasn't all. They were also critically low on fuel and ammo. So, Hong announced that now was the time for bright ideas to solve their problems. That's when Corporal Lee Gong-woo raised his hand. He had an idea of his own. He suggested they prioritize securing more crafting materials. This proposal seemed to come out of left field, which is why Kwang demanded an explanation. But despite the confusion, the
corporal stood by his suggestion, confident it would help. Thinking it over, our hero recalled that he'd
wanted to gather materials for the vehicles for Shin. If they'd just had the resources, they could have
salvaged the ones they had to abandon. Considering the corporal's specialty was
combat engineering,
our hero gave him the floor to explain. Gong-woo's argument was surprisingly
persuasive. The main issue was food and fuel still being top priority. But the idea of grabbing easily obtainable materials to ensure safe travel was also genius. What he was really proposing was
building and customizing their own war machines. Vehicles that wouldn't get swarmed by monsters, they could add some
upgrades, like thorn barriers. Hong agreed instantly. If their rides were reinforced, they wouldn't have to creep along so cautiously. Shin then questioned if a combat engineer could even handle these modifications. And the MEs. Corporal confidently replied that, given time, yes. Turns out, combat engineers are trained for this kind of work. It's
basically the textbook definition of vehicle armor. And if Shin's guess was right, production skills are stronger
than anyone expected in this game. Still, our hero warned him. He'd reject the plan if the corporal was just testing his
skills. But Gong-woo stood firm, insisting this was their top priority right now. With that, the
protagonist cut him off, telling him that was enough. He just had to give it his all. Now, other matters were
still important, but Shin was now convinced this was the priority. So as the day's work wrapped up, our hero
announced he'd inform them of the final decision later. With that, everyone was dismissed. Later that night, Shin lit a fire. He'd have to ask for help setting the tables. The barracks kitchen was completely useless. No electricity, no water, but this makeshift dinner setup would have to do. Thus, Shin decided to start with the monster fat he'd collected. But though edible, the cooking smell was absolutely vile. This was animal fat infused with mana. When cooked, it adapted to the dish's own mana. For the hero, this ingredient was a culinary god-tier item. It made anything fried unbelievably delicious. The legendary cooking oil was ready. Later, in a meeting, Gong-woo reported that there was a large hardware warehouse near the police quarters. Yang immediately questioned how the corporal knew this. The boy explained the base would send him there for urgent crafting materials. So Hyung asked if he was suggesting they raid that location for supplies. Gong-woo confirmed it. the place was enormous. It should have almost every material they needed. It's near the barracks, but far from the city center. And Shin figured that meant fewer zombies. Hyung felt a surge of pride for the corporal, as did
Shin, who agreed it was a golden opportunity. Therefore, the hero ordered Kwang to prepare the troops.
They'd move out with the same teams, but add a combat engineer to each. Gongwoo was tasked with finding a vehicle in good shape and bringing it to the front. Hung questioned the danger of driving, but the protagonist stated they had no other choice. They had to move supplies, and Shin assured them they would proceed with extreme caution. But later, trouble found them. The hero demanded an injury report. 3 were wounded, but luckily, none were in critical condition, now that they were out of danger.
Shin ordered the medics to focus on treatment and Kwang to secure their path forward. The soldiers were now at full speed, with Gongwoo flooring the accelerator. The guild had minimized combat noise
as much as possible, but they couldn't predict this ambush. As expected, traveling by road was still a death trap. Monsters usually fight each other for prey, which was completely unlike the zombies, who just shuffled past them. Using the same formation, the warriors cleared a path for the truck. Upon arrival, the soldiers saw the warehouse was truly massive. The interior, however, was probably picked clean. Shin knew they had to move fast. He ordered Lee's team to secure the warehouse entrance. The engineers would point out the needed supplies to the soldiers. The rest would be manual labor, which began with the hero's shout, "Advance!" But as they reached the entrance, everyone was stunned. The warehouse was an absolute wreck. Seeing this, Shin told the others not to worry. They just had to grab the materials and leave. He then ordered the soldiers to keep the entrance clear for hauling everything to the truck. First up were the steel plates. Many were scattered on the ground, requiring extra care. However, while the soldiers were organizing the materials, an eerie sound echoed through the hall. Everyone heard it, even the engineers. That sound meant one thing: they weren't alone. Shin ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Instantly, the soldiers drew their weapons, ready for a fight. But suddenly, the metal plates began to move on their own. Fear gripped them as a dark energy swirled from the back of the warehouse, sucking in all the metal. Piece by piece, the plates began to merge, forming something much, much larger. It revealed a colossal monster that was hidden in plain sight. The beast roared, and the resonating
shockwave alone was enough to prove its incredible power. Both Kwang and the others
had never seen anything like it. The sergeants were terrified, but having survived so much, our hero was confident in their victory. He ordered the soldiers into their battle formations. The sheer force of the roar shattered the warehouse windows. Lee, on guard duty, sprang into action. While running, she could only wonder how huge the monster was. But seeing it was far worse than she had imagined. In a single devastating blow, the beast took down 5 soldiers. Hyung roared, "Use the jerky!" Kwang, meanwhile, launched a direct assault. But the monster's body was made of solid iron plates. Attacks were completely useless. Again and again, the beast brutally crushed the soldiers. Even the buffs from our hero's special meals were having no effect. This monster was on a totally different level than Shin could imagine. Without a moment's pause, the beast struck from all sides, making the very ground tremble. Soldiers were thrown like rag dolls, and our hero knew at this rate they were all doomed. So Shin unleashed his secret weapon, the monster bait. It had worked wonders on the mountain. But this time, as he tossed the gourmet jerky, the beast simply swatted it away. Shin stared, completely dumbfounded.
Was my seasoning off, he wondered, having a chef's crisis? But Hung screamed a warning to snap him out of it.
This thing was too much for them. They had to fall back. Now Shin gave the order for a strategic withdrawal. They backed away slowly, covering their rear. The wounded were evacuated first. And as they fled for their lives, our hero swore this beast would regret insulting his cooking. Thankfully, the monster didn't give chase. It seemed they had crossed into its territory. Still, the squad was in trouble and had to get back fast as they could. Back at base camp, a soldier suggested they abandon the material collection mission. The risk was too high. The potential casualties weren't worth it. Kwang had to agree with that assessment, but he asked if our hero had found a weakness. The protagonist nodded. Yes, but this time, taking it down will be a whole different challenge. Lee pressed him, asking for the weak point. The system had revealed its secret. The beast's belly was its soft spot, protected by thick metal plates. So, the mission was simple: peel off the armor to strike its core. But everyone knew the risks were too high. After all, they could find the materials somewhere else. Shin, however, was personally offended. It wasn't about the mission anymore. That monster rejected his cooking. It was a carnivore, so what gives? Every living thing has to eat. Our hero just couldn't figure out its bizarre palate. And then, the corporal spoke up.
He suggested the monster's diet might be the metal itself. After a moment of stunned silence, the others asked him
to please explain that crazy idea. The kid pointed to the evidence-clear bite marks on the scrap metal, completely shocked. The commanders grilled him, asking if he was sure. The kid confidently replied that engineers have ways of spotting material stress, and those marks weren't from rust. Still, Hyung's mind couldn't grasp it, a monster that eats iron. But just then, a crazy idea sparked in our hero's mind. He remembered he still had some leftover cooking oil. What if, Shin proposed, we deep fry the metal? Understandably, everyone just stared, as if that would somehow improve the flavor. Still, they stood no chance against the beast in a straight fight. They had to try something before giving up. The corporal actually agreed, saying the crazier the plan, the better. At this point, any method to get it to eat was worth a shot, and so the insane plan was set. Shin ordered a pristine metal plate, brought to him immediately. A short time later, our hero began to cook, and as the iron sizzled, he remembered the humiliation the beast caused him. Suddenly, a system window popped up. The plate was now infused with magic and the cook's bitter feelings of defeat. And just like that, Shin became the first human to pioneer a new field of gastronomy. The system explained that even legendary chefs rarely stray from the path, dying without ever attempting to reach a new frontier. But not our hero for his feat. He received a pioneer reward, a new skill called Ingredient Limit Break. Shin was absolutely stunned. Then, the corporal used his material identification skill. He reported that the plate wasn't stronger. In fact, its structural integrity had actually plummeted to a near useless state. So it wouldn't make the armor tougher, like our hero hoped. And if the monster actually enjoys this, Hung figured the plan was a bust. But unexpectedly, Gongwoo saw it differently, calling it an absolutely incredible breakthrough. To completely alter a material's properties just by frying it in oil was nothing short of a miracle. The sergeant had to agree. Shin just grumbled about messing around with his cooking. Just then, a soldier appeared, reporting that the squad was ready to mobilize. Hearing this, our hero decided it was time to begin the operation. Most of the men had no idea his cooking could alter emotions. After all, it wasn't a smart move to advertise such a unique ability. As for the cooked plate, Shin just treated it as a simple debuff item for the time being. This time, he was sure that monster wouldn't be able to resist. Back at the warehouse, the scrap metal began to stir once more. The soldiers had been confused before, but now they understood. The monster uses the junk to form its body, a defense mechanism that activates when enemies are near. So everyone stayed on high, alert. At the heart of the swirling metal was its core, a dark shadow shielded by layers of steel. Without hesitation, our hero hurls the crispy iron plate at the beast. And just like that, it loses its pull and plummets to the ground, baffling everyone. But then, the monster opened a strange void and started sucking the metal into its core. Shin was shocked at how easy that was. So, our hero hopes the creature enjoys its little snack. Meanwhile, outside, Lee on guard duty finds this sudden silence deeply unsettling. Inside, the beast's armor retracts so it can feast. And even though the plan worked, everyone thinks its true form is surprisingly cute. But Hung still asks why our hero is so relaxed. Shin reveals the dish's special effect. Total defeat. Right now, the monster is just a helpless creature, quivering from the absolute taste of failure. Hung is thrilled with the plan, and Shin moves to end it, quickly. But the corporal rushes in, saying the sergeant needs to see him urgently. Gongwoo leads them to a different iron plate, analyzing it with his chief's eye. A system alert warns that this iron plate from the monster is magically reinforced. Despite its quality, it's not a recommended ingredient due to poor hygiene. But this alone stuns Shin, because the system recognized the plate as an ingredient. In any case, the corporal warns this isn't just normal metal, it's been reinforced by the monster's own magic. Hyung finally gets why their attacks failed, and Gongwoo finds this fascinating that the effect lingers outside the beast. This reinforced metal could be a game changer for the military, so the corporal asks if they can somehow keep the monster alive. Logically, not everyone agrees. With simply leaving the monster alone, our protagonist gets the point, but also agrees that a creature like this is incredibly dangerous. The beast is docile now, but who knows when it might rampage again. However, Gongwoo won't back down, insisting they can use this characteristic to create something incredible. Shin is torn on what to do. The corporal suggests securing the monster somewhere safe so they don't lose this precious resource. Hyung then asks our hero for his final decision on the matter, making Gongwoo ecstatic. He declares he won't let this opportunity pass. And so, the military gets fired up and jumps into action. Seconds later, the monster is safely inside a cage. Shin then warns that Mac
We'll be staying there, with no metal nearby, which makes the little guy absolutely furious. At a later time,
the engineers examine the metal from the monster, realizing it's unbelievably stronger than normal. Naturally, they're thrilled, and our hero thinks this is perfect. Gongwoo, in turn, thanks them for their trust, and for prioritizing the materials. With his job done, Shin lets the corporal take over and proceed. With the plan, during construction, the system pings several low-level kitchen materials, and Shin is excited that once again, things are being flagged as potential ingredients. If the engineer's skill only works on crafting materials, our hero's is truly superior and limitless. He thinks that if used, with the chief's eye which spots weaknesses, they could take down any monster. A few days pass, and the modifications are finally complete. Gongwoo asks for the superior's verdict. But the result was so
shocking that everyone was just left speechless. The truck even has horns, making one soldier compare it to something straight out of a Mad Max movie. But despite the bizarre design, the engineer promises that it will perform perfectly, and Shin has no complaints. Getting down to business, the corporal explains that the vehicle is built for both driving and combat. The spikes on its side can shred monsters, except for
that last steel monster they fought, which makes sense to our protagonist. In any event, the engineer says to think of the truck as a mobile barricade and a tank. Plus, with an acoustic insulator, they can reduce the noise, and Shin is delighted with the progress. Changing topics, Hyung asks how their little pet Mac is doing. The sergeant reports that he's doing just fine. For now, he's being monitored and fed, and he doesn't seem to transform with only a few metal plates nearby. What's more, the iron plates he consumes are reinforced with magic, a huge benefit for the guild. So it seems whenever they feed the monster metal, he reinforces it. At the moment, the reinforcement process is slow, but the engineers are working on speeding it up. Who knows, one day they could build a wall with it. While our hero is worried, Hung thinks it's genius. Later, the commanders search for a
convenience store, finding one right at the border. Hearing this, Lee suggests they send out the new vehicle.
Shin insists they need supplies, but Hung argues that staying put is a death sentence. They have to act. Lee agrees first, despite her doubts about finding anything useful. It might be a small store, but the locals would have surely frequented it for supplies. Hung is banking on it not being empty, since it's nearby. Shin sees the logic. He agrees it's a solid plan, and they prepare to move out. Arriving at the convenience store, everyone is blown away by the truck's performance. Its first run was flawless, tearing monsters to pieces. The military, however, now has to clean up the mess, and the sergeant admits he didn't consider the cleanup. Shin tells them to focus, handing out military ration number 3. As the soldiers cheer, our hero finds the naming convention amusingly straightforward. This jerky grants the user enhanced hearing, so the squad enters the store on high alert. As the group splits up, they begin scavenging the shelves, but unfortunately, every single one is bare. Still, our hero decides to double-check. Just then, a soldier urgently calls for the sergeant. He's found a zombie corpse. Its skull was clearly caved in by a powerful headshot. From an axe, it seems another survivor is nearby. But then a strange noise echoes. The entire group freezes. Instantly, Shin signals everyone to stay perfectly still. His senses screaming. He realizes they're not alone. The sound is coming from deeper inside.
From the butcher's section, it sounds muffled, like someone is desperately trying to hide.
The unit closes in, suspecting an ambush monster that preys on the unwary. With a mighty blow, Kwang shatters the gate, completely obliterating it. Right behind him, our main character activates his chief's eye. No matter the monster, if he can find its weakness, he can slice it up, like a perfectly prepared cut of meat, or a dish just waiting to be served. But to his surprise, the system only detects a human presence, with their hiding spot gone. The person emerges. It's a terrified girl, shielding her even younger brother in the
past. Her group of survivors found this market filled with supplies, but they couldn't carry it all.
A woman in their group urged them to leave, sensing the danger. And even though they had filled their packs, one of the men suggested stashing the rest. However, the girl insisted they leave immediately, saying they could return later. The two men were a bit annoyed, but one of them called for Suyeon and her brother to move out. But just as they were about to leave, something monstrous appeared, wrecking everything in a flash. Some men were cut down. Others were thrown aside. The man with the ponytail screamed for Swan to run, warning her about the terrifying creature. Initially, the kids were frozen in confusion, and the man kept pleading for them to flee. But before he could explain, the monster ripped him to shreds right before their eyes. The horrific sight snapped Suan out of it. She grabbed her brother's arm and fled without looking back. As the monster slaughtered her companions, the girl hid with her brother, barely daring to breathe.